Chapter 16. The next day, they had normal classes in the morning. It was weird to have regular subjects like science and history taught by heroes. After lunch was going to be the best part of the day, however. Hero training. I am here. Coming through the door like a normal person. All Might said as he slid into the classroom and struck a superhero pose. That wasn't normal, was it? Tanya whispered to Izuku, who chuckled and shook his head. Now we know why the door is so big. Izuku nodded and All Might gave a little explanation about the hero training today, and it was called Battle Trials. The other students asked a bunch of questions, clearly flustering All Might. We'll learn about it when we get to the training facility. Izuku said and cut everyone off. All Might gave him a big thumbs up. That's right, young Midoriya. He said and looked at the other students. Grab your hero outfits and head onto the bus. They're ready. Eureka asked as she jumped up from her seat. All Might waved at the side of the room and 18 of the 20 drawers opened up. Some of them were a bit of a challenge to get right, but they are all complete to your specifications. Yay! Eureka and the pink-skinned girl named Mina shouted together. Why is there only 18? Ida asked as he took the large metal case that had his hero costume inside. We already have ours. Tanya said and took hers out from under her desk. It was a much different shape than the rectangular cases the others had, because of her rifle and the small backpack that provided constant air pressure. We are going to kick ass again today. Izuku said as he stood with his own case. No doubt. Tanya said, and they walked out of the classroom with the other students. They were soon on the bus and were getting out at the same training facility that they had their entrance exam in. Yes, definitely more ass-kicking today. I wouldn't be too sure of that. We might be in the same place but we won't be doing the same thing. All Might said, a little cryptically. Everyone. Get changed and meet back here in 10 minutes. The students did just that and came out of the locker rooms in their full hero costumes. Some looked like they were just wearing normal clothes, just in a different and more versatile style, while others looked completely different. Izuku and Tanya had been the first back and they turned to look at everyone. Tanya, forgive me in advance for this. Izuku whispered to her as his eyes locked onto Eureka. Tanya chuckled at him. Only if you forgive her for staring at you in the shower after the exam. What? Izuku asked as his head whipped around to stare at his best friend, clearly shocked. Here she comes. Tanya whispered and turned his head back to face the brown-haired girl. Izuku wasn't sure he wanted to tease the girl now, and sighed mentally. He was committed to it and let out a wolf whistle of appreciation. Eureka. Whoa. He said and winced internally. Eureka's face flushed to a deep red and walked over to them. Wasn't quite specific enough and well. Spandex fits very well, doesn't it? Tanya asked as her hand reached out and she ran it down Izuku's chest to his abdomen. Eureka's eyes followed her hand and her eyes widened as that hand reached Izuku's belt. She let out a little eep sound when it looked to be going down farther. She looked back up at his face and saw that he was blushing, too. Mine's great. Mina, the pink-skinned girl said and walked over to them. It's exactly what I wanted. They looked at her and she turned around for them to show off her purple spandex outfit that fit her like a glove. It left nothing to the imagination and she turned back to grin at their surprised faces. Yep. That's the look I was going for. Mina said, happily. Okay. Wow. Eureka whispered. I don't feel so bad about mine now. Izuku swallowed audibly and nodded. You both look very and nice. He said, his voice cracking. Mina laughed and hopped up towards him with her arms out. Izuku reached automatically and caught her at the same time. She grinned at him, only grabbing her by the waist and planted a kiss on his cheek, which startled him. You can put me down now. Mina said and Izuku did so. Tanya, you're so lucky. Tanya had watched the whole interaction and she appreciated that Izuku hadn't grabbed the girl's ass, even though he had just seen all of it jiggling in front of him. She nodded to Mina and the girl grinned. I see everyone is here. All Might said as he came out of the observation booth. Come inside and I'll tell you what's going to happen. The students followed him inside and he told them about the mock battles they would be having against their fellow students. They would be broken up into two-person teams and lots would be drawn to match them up. They could be heroes or villains and wouldn't know which until the lots were drawn. The first pair of heroes are Izuku Midoriya and Tanya Degraf. All Might said and looked at his hand. Hey. I could have sworn I put Tanya's name in the other bag. Tanya gave Izuku a pointed look and he nodded slightly. The other pairings didn't really matter, because they all thought whoever went up against the power couple, they were going to lose. The first match was Momo and Mina as heroes versus Todoroki and Kirishima as villains. It was over in seconds as Todoroki unleashed his ice blizzard and covered the entire building except for the room he and Kirishima were in. WHWH what a WW waste. Mina said as she shivered from the cold and Momo bent down and used an ice hammer she made to chip Mina's feet out of the thick ice covering her boots. Why bother PP playing if you're GG going to do that? That's my thought exactly. All Might said. Todoroki, you were supposed to coordinate with your partner and devise a strategy too. It worked. I won in 3 seconds and I used my quirk to the best of my ability. Todoroki said. Mr. Aizawa said to never hold back. Why are you complaining? All Might sighed. Because none of you actually learned anything. This was an exercise in planning, coordination, and teamwork to achieve a goal. We have to use another building now because of your ice barrage. It's a good thing you have hundreds of them practically next to each other. Todoroki said. You don't have to be such a jerk about it. Eureka said with her arms crossed under her chest. That just happened to push her breasts up even more than the spandex normally did, and it was a distraction to a lot of the guys. I got in on a recommendation and didn't have to do the practical exam. Todoroki responded and ignored Eureka's blatant distraction attempt. I think I deserve the MVP slot. I think you deserve a kick in the butt. Mina said, still shivering. Momo sighed and stood as she finally got the girl free from the block of ice she was in. I had a recommendation as well. Izuku looked at Tanya and she shook her head only enough for him to see it. You weren't the only students here to be recommended. All Might said, and Tanya gave him a glare to shut him up. He sweated slightly at the intense look and then smiled. 2 others in Class 1B also got in with recommendations. We've met. They are terrible choices for candidates. Todoroki said and leaned against the wall. The girl can divide herself into multiple pieces that fly around, which is of limited use. The guy, he makes things soft. Wait, what? Tanya asked. What do you mean? He makes anything he touches, or an area, softer. The ground becomes like sand, metal becomes like sponge, etc. etc. That's it. That's all he can do. Tanya asked, anger filling her. Tanya. Izuku whispered. No. Tanya asked and her body started to glow as her eyes changed to gold. I lost my recommended spot and some idiot with a quirk that is only good for rescues, gets in without having to do the entrance exam to prove he is hero material. How stupid is that? All of the other students were shocked by her words and now by her hissing anger that was lighting up the room. Unfortunately, that's out of your control. All Might said. Izuku took Tanya's hands. Hey. He whispered for her ears only. Sweetheart. Tanya caught her breath and her angry gold eyes snapped to his. Izuku. There were dozens of students at the exam that had great quirks and they didn't get in. Any of them deserved that recommendation. Izuku lifted her hands to put them on his shoulders, then he stepped close and put his arms around her. You deserved it and they took it from you. He said and bent his head slightly to kiss her cheek. You know the people in charge are all idiots. You can't blame them for more bad decisions. Tanya held her anger for only a few moments more, then the glow faded from around her and her eyes went back to their normal ice blue. Yes, I can. I can also hold them responsible. Well, we can find out who's next on the list. If they are hero material, Izuku's words trailed off. You will not hurt or maim another student to bring someone else in. All Might said, his voice stern. It just warms my heart that that was the very first thing you assumed I would do. Tanya said and glared at him. Thank you for the vote of confidence, Mr. All Might, symbol of peace, sir. All Might visibly flinched and Tanya's face showed part of her manic smile. You had a recommendation? Momo asked. She was a tall black-haired young woman that wore a very revealing costume that was like a red one-piece bathing suit with most of the front removed. She also had a thick belt of pouches around her waist and a thick chemistry book strapped to her back. I had it since I was 5 and passed the expert flying course for the military. Tanya said and the other students kept staring at her, their eyes wide. Expert? Momo asked, shocked. No one passes that course. It's rumored to be impossible. I've flown through worse. Tanya said with a shrug. They had me to do it twice, the second time slower, just so they could see me doing it. At 5 years old. Momo said, her voice barely a whisper. I wanted to do it before then, but, they said they couldn't make a flight suit that small. Tanya said. The room was completely quiet after that revelation. Now I see why you didn't want it revealed. You didn't want them fawning over you as much as I do. Izuku whispered in her ear, which made her laugh softly. All Might coughed loudly to get everyone's attention. On to the next matchup. He said and drew 2 balls. Team A is the heroes and Team D is the villains. We forfeit. Eureka and Ida said at the same time. All Might sighed. You can't forfeit. I already explained that this is a team-building exercise. We're the villains, right? Eureka asked and he nodded. Then we surrender to the heroes. Arrest us. A few of the other students laughed, some uncomfortably. You need to wait for the actual event to start before you can do that. All Might said with a sigh. You have 5 minutes to prepare your defense and the heroes will be coming for you. Eureka looked at Ida. This is going to be quick, no matter what we do. At least all of our speeds are reduced in enclosed spaces. Ida said and followed Eureka out of the monitor room. Do we follow and decimate them? Izuku asked. I think we would insult them if we didn't go all out. Tanya said. I agree. Let's kick their butts in the most humane way possible. Tanya nodded and they left the monitor room as well. I can't wait to see what they do. Mina said, excitedly. It's going to be unexpected. Bakugo said and stared at the monitor. I just know it. How? Kirishima asked. I used to bully Izuku when we were kids because I thought he was quirkless. Bakugo admitted and a few of the others stared at him like he was a bug. Then Tanya showed up in our class 5 years ago, taught me a lesson about illegal quirk usage by not using her quirk to defeat me while I tried to use mine, and I went to psychotherapy for 2 years. That made the glares change to looks of understanding. It took me that long to realize I hated that I was given free rein. No one tried to give me rules to follow or disciplined me when I did bad things, like bullying others and using my quirk all the time, and it was all because of my powerful quirk and they didn't want to get on my bad side. Bakugo said. I also learned that Izuku had an unrivaled analytical mind and Tanya had a tactical one. Combined, no one can touch them, either mentally or academically. You have come a long way, young Bakugo. All Might said and lightly touched the boy's shoulder. I'm going to go further. Bakugo said and lifted his head, proudly. I'm going to be a great hero. Not necessarily number one, because that can change every year and I'll always have a chance to take that spot. That is a great attitude, young man. Good for you. All Might said. Let's watch the round, even if it's going to be quick. It will be. They never take mercy on anyone. Bakugo said and looked at the large monitor. Never. Chapter 17. Top down. Izuku asked as they stood outside the villain's hideout that they would be having their battle against Ida and Eureka. Check your visor. Tanya said and looked up at the building. She used a viewing spell and smiled. Okay, top floor. Rear corner. We can assault by the stairs or the windows behind them. Izuku said. Or, Tanya turned to hug him close and whispered in his ear. Oh, that's just evil. Izuku said with a chuckle. That's me. Tanya the evil. Tanya said with her trademark manic grin. Asterisk. Eureka floated off of the floor, fully prepared to fly and assault anyone coming in through the windows. She lightly played with the maneuvering controls and was delighted that they actually worked much better than Izuku and Tanya had said. Her oversized gauntlets held 10 canisters of compressed air that could shoot her in any direction she wanted, practically instantly. The buzzer to start rang through the building and she tensed. Get ready for anything. Ida said. As villains, we need to be prepared for them to get the jump on us. You've got the door and the stairs, I've got the windows. There's no way they can approach us without us knowing about it. Eureka said. Hump, hump, crash cum. Ah. Eureka and Ida yelled at the same time as the entire middle of the ceiling exploded downwards and became nothing but dust. Izuku landed in a superhero pose to stop his momentum and slowly stood up. It's over, villains. Never, hero. Eureka shouted, getting into her role, and used up half of a canister of air as she launched herself forward like a bullet. Izuku tried to dodge before she reached him and almost succeeded. Got you. Eureka exclaimed as her hand slapped Izuku's butt in the middle of his lunge to the side. She secretly loved the feeling and blushed a little at getting to touch him. Izuku let out a yelp and became weightless, then Eureka's momentum from the slap flipped him over and he started to drift slowly in the air. Good one, Eureka. Your villainy knows no bounds. Ida said and pulled out the roll of capture tape as his engines revved. I'll have him tied up in less than a second. Eureka had to use another half canister of air to stop herself before she hit the wall and ignored Ida's posturing. 2 shots rang out with a metal clang and Ida skidded to a stop just after he started to run. He looked down and saw that he had 2 circular dents in his metal boots where his toes were. It took him a second before he realized that really hurt. Oh. Ida yelled and started hopping around as he tried to unstrap his boots. Ida. Eureka exclaimed and cancelled her own weightlessness to go help her teammate. She had just knelt to help with a strap when she heard a voice behind her. Checkmate. Izuku said as another shot rang out and he zoomed past them. He twisted in midair and floated right over to the bomb and gripped it with a hand. Heroes win. All Might said over the speakers and another buzzer sounded. Tanya floated down through the hole and saw Izuku hanging upside down from the top of the bomb. Technically, that shouldn't count. Izuku laughed and pushed off to hit the ceiling and he pushed off from there to float down to her. Tanya caught his hand and pulled him in close to hold him steady. It's a little weird that I get to hold onto you like this. Tanya whispered to him. Not to me. Izuku lightly caressed her face. It feels wonderful. Tanya blushed a little. Stop that. No, Izuku said and his thumb lightly rubbed her cheek as his hand cupped the side of her face. If you two are done making googly eyes at each other, Ida's in pain here. Eureka spat. Oh, right. Tanya said and walked over to her with a weightless Izuku floating like a balloon in her hand. Sorry about that, Ida. It was the quickest way to disable your speed quirk. Eureka, let me down. Izuku said and the girl pressed her hands together to release him. He dropped several inches to the floor and knelt beside Ida. He easily found the clasps and popped the boy's armor off of his legs and then slipped off his armored shoes. Tanya hovered a hand over Ida's feet and nodded. They're only bruised and nothing's broken. It felt like they were. Ida said and then sighed as Tanya used her healing spell on him. Thanks. Now that we've seen your armor, we have a few redesigns for you. Izuku said as he used his fingers to pop the metal back out to the right shape as if it was nothing. Ida stared at him as he did the other metal shoe. You're really strong. Bending metal this weak and light? Ha. Izuku said and put the shoes back on him. I practice with discarded rebar at construction sites. With the foreman's permission, of course. That he saves a ton of money also helps. He can reuse the ones Izuku straightens. Tanya said. That, too. Izuku said and helped Ida put his leg armor back on. Wait a second. How did you zoom past me? I left you hanging nowhere near the walls. Eureka said. With this. Izuku pulled out a toy pistol. Every action requires an equal and opposite reaction. You shot the gun to propel yourself. Eureka said, astonished. That's so cool. Izuku handed the pistol back to Tanya, who checked it over, nodded, and slipped it into her left hip holster. Come on, we need to get back to the control room. Ida said and they all started walking. What are the design changes my armor needs? If it's supposed to protect you and not just look cool, you should look into better composites of metals for strength and toughness. Maybe even some carbon fiber linings. It's a lot more expensive, though. Izuku said. Also, you need to have strategic angles mounted on it. What he's not saying is that the right angles will deflect things off rather than letting the entire force of something hit you directly. Tanya said. If you had part of a triangle shape on the top of your boots, my shots to crush the metal onto your toes would have been reduced to less than half as effective. Ida thought about that and had to agree. If his boots hadn't been flat, her single shots wouldn't have incapacitated him so quickly. I would be happy to brainstorm with you about your ideas. Eureka turned slightly and slapped Izuku's shoulder. What did I give you this morning? Oh. Right. Izuku said and then sighed. We won't be doing that without consulting with the UA support company first. Tanya barked a laugh. Thanks, Eureka. He needed someone other than me to get some sense knocked into his head about certain things. Eureka laughed, too. You two did so much for me already that I'm glad I could help. They entered the control room and almost everyone there clapped, even All Might. That was a masterful play on all of your parts. Well done. All Might said. Does anyone have ideas on the MVP? Izuku. Most of the other students said as one. Why is that? All Might asked. He was both the distraction and the main aggressor to get to the bomb. A dark-haired girl with earphone jacks as earlobes said. Tanya couldn't have done it. She also stayed as a support role and didn't deviate or tried to hog the spotlight, which worked out well. Excellent points, Jiro. All Might said. Anyone else? She kind of made my argument for Tanya being MVP. Mina, the pink-skinned girl said. I liked Ida's manliness in embracing his villain role. Kirishima said and made a fist in the air. Also good points. All Might said and looked at them all. It was a fast round. Should we review it A&D? No. Eureka exclaimed and then snapped her mouth shut in embarrassment. I mean, there's no point in watching it again. It was pretty clear that they caught us flat-footed with their surprise attack and we were just reacting to their plan the entire time. It's true. We never expected an assault through the roof of the building. It was quite the ingenious plan. Ida said, his praise reluctant. It was risky as well. Todoroki offered. What if they were standing in the middle of the room? We would have attacked the corner. Tanya said and everyone looked at her. We knew exactly where our targets were. How? He asked, genuinely curious. That would be telling our secrets for no gain. Tanya said with a smirk. The other students fell into a discussion about that as Izuku felt someone's hand touch his back. He turned his head slightly and expected Tanya, only to see Toru, the invisible girl, lean in close. It's also how you can see me, isn't it? Toru whispered. Yes. Izuku whispered back. Can you tell me what I look like? Izuku smiled slightly. You have shoulder-length dirty blonde hair, nice caring eyes, and cute cheeks that dimple when you smile. Toru blushed at his description and ducked her head a little. She really appreciated that he hadn't said he liked her boobs or that he could see all of her. Izuku, you don't know what? I know. Izuku cut her off and she looked up at his face, startled. I know what it's like for people to look at you and then look right through you as if you weren't really there. Oh, Izuku. Toru whispered and glanced at Tanya, then she smiled and leaned forward to kiss his cheek. You only need a few more girls to do that and then you will have collected kisses from every girl in class. If that's true, I'm surprised Eureka hasn't done it yet. I already saved her life. What else does she want me to do? Izuku joked. Toru chuckled softly and gave him another quick peck on the cheek. You can have that until I subtly remind her later. Please don't slap her upside the head. Izuku whispered, which made her close her mouth to stop her laugh. He could see her eyes dancing with mirth, however. Toru nodded slightly and walked back over to where she had stood before and discreetly slipped her big gloves back on and put her feet back into her empty boots. No one even realized that she had crossed the room. Whatever. This conversation is going nowhere. Who's going next? The Kogo asked. I'll draw the lots. All Might said and the next 4 students left to go have their epic battle over a fake bomb. The others watched through the monitors and a few of them complained again that there was no sound. Why is that? Izuku asked. All Might looked over to him. Why is there no sound? We have high-quality digital video and not even low-quality audio. I don't really know. All Might said. I mean, even a short-range walkie-talkie would work from there to here. Izuku said. It's really weird that the entire place isn't wired for everything. Now I wonder if all of the facilities that the school uses has any audio at all and are only wired for video. I don't know if there's any way we can test for that. Tanya mused as she considered it. We can't go setting off EMPs to destroy any hidden cameras, can we? Izuku smiled. We could. Please refrain from causing damage to school facilities. All Might said. Do they have cameras in the classrooms? Momo asked. That depends on if they care about student conduct. Ida said and rubbed his chin. I've yet to see anyone be admonished for certain behavior. It's just a stupid desk. My feet didn't hurt it. The Kogo exclaimed. It's made for the hero course. Did you even look at it? It's reinforced steel and is painted to look like wood. That made everyone's chuckles stop at his observational skills. None of them bothered to examine the desks at all and just assumed they were normal desks. Everyone except Izuku and Tanya, that is. He's right, you know. Izuku said. It might be a bit disrespectful, but it didn't hurt the desk. If students like Kirishima and Tetsu with hardening quirks can use them without damaging them, a pair of sneakers won't even scratch them. Who's Tetsu? He sounds manly. Kirishima asked. He's in class 1B. Tanya said. We haven't gotten much more about the class besides their names and what quirks the ones that were in our exam group had. What does he become? Kirishima asked as he morphed into his hardened form that almost looked like jagged rocks. A steel-like substance. Izuku said. I don't think it's actually steel, just like you aren't actually rock. It just looks that way. He said and nodded slightly at Bakugo, letting the other teen know he provided the example on purpose. Thanks, you bastard. Bakugo whispered, which made Izuku grin. The rest of the students had their battles and returned to the control room for analysis and debate over the MVPs of each match. Strategies were dissected and other ideas offered to change the odds and potential to snatch victory from defeat. The funny thing was, Toru was the quickest to get the bomb and no one knew she had even passed the villains. While the others were debating what they actually saw, Izuku walked over to the invisible girl. Nice going, Toru. The villains had no clue that you went in with them. Izuku complimented. Thanks. Toru said and she wasn't sure what to do about getting so much praise. She also wasn't sure why it meant so much more coming from Izuku. Your quirk is one of the best I've seen. Izuku said with a smirk, which made her laugh. You haven't seen me at my best yet. Toru said, almost suggestively, and posed with her gloved hands on her hips. I look forward to it. Izuku replied. All right, class. That's it for today. You all did very well. All Might said and ignored the three glares from Momo, Mina, and Todoroki's partner in their match. Get cleaned up and changed before you board the bus. The students filed out and Tanya and Izuku walked side by side. You spent a bit of time with Toru this afternoon. Tanya whispered. She looked a little lost. Almost like me when we met, to be honest. Izuku whispered back and they stopped to let the others enter the changing rooms and showers. He told her everything that he and Toru said to each other and their reactions. Tanya had to nod in agreement that it seemed the invisible girl suffered a different kind of ostracization than Izuku, and yet, the results were the same. You want to be her friend? I think I already am. Izuku said. I'm also sure that she's going to be a bit more outgoing with the other girls in our class, now that she's among her actual peers and not children. Tanya smirked at him. Do you really think a kiss on your cheek is that much of a confidence boost? You tell me. Izuku said and kissed her cheek to make her blush a little. See you in a few minutes. Tanya nodded and watched him walk into the boys' side of the changing rooms. She admired his muscular form, shook her head at that odd thought, and went into the girls' changing room. Wasn't Izuku awesome? Mina, the pink-skinned girl asked as she folded her tights into the carrying case. I've never seen anyone look so cool. I wonder if we can get a copy of the video. Toru asked. It sucks there was no audio, though. I have it. Tanya said and all of the girls turned to look at her. Momo, Jiro, Mina, Eureka, Tsuyu and Toru stared at her with surprise on their faces. How? Izuku said. Tanya reached up and tapped her ear and then touched her collar. Earpiece and microphone. It picks up everything in a certain area. She said and unbuttoned her blazer. I'll petition for the footage right away. Momo said and used her phone to quickly type up the proper request and send it. They all stood there for several tense seconds, then her phone beeped. Yes. We can have it for review purposes. I'm pretty good at audio matching. Toru offered. I had to learn it years ago because, well, it's hard to match sound to video when you can't really see the subject material. Tanya said and the girl nodded. I can have the audio file ready by tonight. This is going to be great. Eureka said and walked over to the group showers as she slipped off her towel. Our performances were pretty awesome. I only have the audio for the one match. Tanya said and put her blazer into the case beside her rifle. She added the earpiece and then took off her shirt. Why do you always wear a shirt and not a blouse? Mina asked as she took off her panties, checked to see if they were soiled, and tossed them into the dirty laundry part of the case. Honestly, I'm used to the way they button. Tanya said and all of the girls looked surprised. I'm also not one for frills, skirts, or dresses. I think you would look awesome if you did dress up. Eureka said and started the water. She hit the soap dispenser and lathered up quickly. Mina went to the shower beside her and did the same. It would shock Izuku. Toru said as she walked over to a shower and turned it on. That's why I don't do it. Tanya admitted and took her pants and underwear off. It's difficult enough for Izuku that I'm a tomboy and he can't stop staring at my ass. If I dressed up like a girl even once. That made the other girls laugh pretty loudly before they all went to the showers to get cleaned up. Chapter 18. The rest of the week passed without incident. The students had normal classes and the afternoons were the hero training classes. They had a few different heroes teach them different things from balance while fighting, using cover to advantage, being a calming influence during stressful situations, and a few other things. The weekend arrived and it was the first time that the class would be meeting for a social occasion at the beach near Izuku's home. A few of the students declined the invitation to hang out, namely the reclusive and adversarial Todoroki, whom was Endeavor's son, and also the guy with a beak that had a dark shadow as a companion, and it couldn't take the bright sun for long periods of time. This place is great. Eureka exclaimed as she and the others stepped through the entrance to the beach. We've already got a section reserved for us. Izuku said and pointed to a partially marked off area. Umbrellas, extra towels, a chest of drinks, and a few wooden chair recliners. You guys really went all out for us. Mina, the pink-skinned girl asked, surprised. You are our fellow classmates and future heroes. What kind of people would we be if we didn't treat you all right? Tanya said. Did you bring anything that needs to be chilled? We have a second ice chest for that. We thought about snacks and decided that we're stopping for lunch and can get something then. Are hot dogs and hamburgers okay with everyone? Izuku asked. Tsuyu raised her hand. I kind of. It's okay, Tsu. We know about your dietary supplements and have you covered. Izuku said with a smile and her eyes went wide. Don't forget about our hobby. We work hard on it when we get the chance. Every time we get the chance. Tanya corrected and Izuku laughed as they all reached the large area. Go ahead and spread out if you want. If you want to move anything or need something else, let either Izuku or myself know. This is great. Momo said and claimed one of the reclining chairs and put a large towel over it. She slipped off the covering she wore and had on a red bathing suit that was eerily similar to her hero costume. She laid down on her back and sighed. I can feel myself tanning already. A noble goal. Toru, the invisible girl said as she took off her shorts and t-shirt to show that she was wearing a two-piece bikini. She sat down on the nearby blanket and laughed. It's too bad I can't get tanned myself. Technically, you can. Izuku said and handed her a can of fruit juice. Tanya and I were discussing your quirk A&D. We're here to relax. Mina cut him off as she whipped off her clothes and showed everyone that she was wearing a bikini as well. A very small bikini in comparison to the size of her assets. I can't wait to get in the water. Jiro had to laugh at her and took off her jeans and torn top to show a black one-piece that was slimming and also showed off her little ass to great effect. You just said relax and water play at the same time. I know. It's going to be a blast. Mina said and hopped up and down, which made most of the boys stare at her jiggling. Eureka jogged around behind the boys and whacked each of them on the back of the head. Ow. 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 Get undressed and stop staring. We're here for fun and not for that. Eureka admonished them as they rubbed their heads. A round of sorry came from the guys and they took off their outer clothes to show off large pairs of beach shorts, some t-shirts, and some bare chests. Izuku hadn't been staring at Mina, because he wasn't stupid, and was glad to avoid Eureka's subtle pre-planned prank. After touching each of them with her full hand, she could negate their weight at any time. He pulled off his own shirt to leave himself bare-chested, which got him some attention because of his muscles, then he slipped off his pants to reveal a pair of Speedos that Tanya had bought for him. There were a couple of whimpers and one gasp from behind him as he bent over to fold up his clothing into a neat pile. He ignored it and turned around to see 6 very red faces of the girls staring at him, including Tanya's, the last he was quite happy about. Izuku couldn't let an opportunity like this pass him by, so he struck a classic All Might hero pose with his legs bent slightly and one arm flexed and the other pointed towards the water. I am here. To go swimming like a normal person. Izuku yelled in his best All Might impression that had taken years to perfect. There was complete silence for several seconds and Izuku thought he had failed, then everyone burst out laughing as hard as they could, even Tanya. Oh, that was awesome. Eureka exclaimed as she laughed and held her sides. She wore a silver bathing suit with high-cut hips and a low cleavage opening. You're hilarious. Mina nearly shouted and her laugh was high-pitched and infectious. So, manly. Kirishima said between guffaws. Izuku let the pose go and stood up straight as he grinned at all of them. The fits of laughter was worth embarrassing himself with the Speedos. What's so funny? Bakugo asked as he walked over to the group. Hey, Kikin. I thought you weren't coming. Izuku said. Our moms talked over the phone this morning. Bakugo groused and Izuku barked a laugh. I told mom to respect your wishes. Izuku said. Bakugo shrugged and used a thumb to point at the others. So, what's up with them? Izuku told him what he did and said, which set everyone to laughing again. Bakugo gave him a stern look for a second, then smiled slightly. That would be funny. Izuku moved to take the pose again and Bakugo smacked him on the side of the head. Ow. It only works once, dumbass. Don't push it. Bakugo said and pulled off his t-shirt to leave himself in beach shorts. Did you bring the shark? Of course. Izuku said and pointed to the box in the middle of the area. I'll help you inflate it. Bakugo nodded and as everyone calmed down, they saw the box be opened and inside were a bunch of water play items. Bakugo and Izuku quickly inflated the blow-up shark they used to play with as kids. 2 inner tubes quickly followed and a bunch of other little things were handed out. What are these things? Eureka asked as she picked up a long foam thing. It's called a pool noodle for some reason. Izuku said. Kikin and I used to use them like swords and BAMP. Izuku stood there, shocked, because Eureka had just whacked him across the face with it. That's so cool. Eureka said and whacked him several times across the chest and then on the side of the head. Ha 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 ha. This is fun. Izuku looked at Tanya, who was holding a hand over her mouth to stop her laugh, and she nodded. Izuku gave her a crooked smile that he only ever did for her and picked up a pool noodle. Noodle war. Izuku shouted and started to parry and attack Eureka back. Eureka held her ground and they fought ferociously, much to everyone's amusement. You know, This would be great training to have at school. Momo suggested. I doubt the foam would last if we were using our quirks, however. Bakugo picked up one and tossed it to her. They're fireproof. Momo looked at the slight scorch marks on it with surprise. You really did use them. Izuku never lies. Bakugo said, as if admitting a secret, and carried the inflated shark to the water. Kirishima grabbed an inner tube and ran after Bakugo. Soon, everyone was doing their own things and the beach party was in full swing. Asterisk. Izuku's mom Inko, Bakugo's mom Mitsuki, and Miss Jasuna arrived at lunchtime carrying several trays of food. Hamburgers, hot dogs, meat skewers, various condiments, and plates and napkins. Izuku. Go grab a picnic table. Inko shouted at the water and the group of playing teenagers. Okay, Mom. Izuku said and he hopped out of the water and ran by them at a fast pace. He walked back carrying a picnic table over his head. Inko, when did Izuku get like that? Mitsuki asked, her eyes wide as she took in Izuku's very well-formed muscles. He's been exercising daily, thanks to All Might and Tanya. He's worked really hard to get into UA. I'm so proud of him. Inko gushed. It's paying off really well. Mitsuko whispered as Izuku carefully put the table down in front of them. Do you have Tsu's stuff separated? She won't like them if they taste like the rest. Izuku said. Inko nodded and pointed to her own container. You can give this to her as soon as there she is. Izuku chuckled and turned to see Tsuyu hopping towards them across the beach, the others following behind her. Just like I promised. He said and handed her the large plastic container. It just came off the cooker, so it's still hot. Inko warned as the other two women opened up the other containers and put everything out for the teenagers to serve themselves. Tsuyu looked inside the container and her heart went pitter-patter. All of her favorites were inside and she had to blink her eyes to stop tears from forming. No one had ever been so considerate of her dietary needs, not even the specialty cook at the school. Thank you, Izuku. Tsuyu said, her face flushing red. This means a lot to me. Izuku put a hand on her shoulder and she looked up at his kind face. I'm sorry this made you feel that way. He said and then carefully pulled her into a hug. I'll talk to Lunch Rush and make sure he's more careful about what he feeds you from now on. Tsuyu stiffened at his words. You would do that for me. Izuku chuckled and Tsuyu really liked that she could hear it through his chest with her ear against it. I can't promise that he'll listen, only that I'll try to imply to him that he's failing as an all-around cook. No. You can't. He'll be sad and Tsuyu started to say. He'll see it as a challenge, I promise. Izuku said and smiled at her. Your food should be at a more manageable temperature to eat now. Tsuyu blinked her eyes at him as he let her go. You. Mom only had the recipes and the general cooking temperatures, so we had to be careful. If there's anything you don't like, let me or her know. Izuku said. Tsuyu glanced over at Tanya, saw a nod, and nodded back before she stuck her hands to Izuku's broad chest and pulled herself up to his height. Before he could do more than look surprised, she puckered her lips and planted a kiss on his cheek for several seconds. Thank you, Izuku. You're very considerate. Tsuyu said and eased herself down to the sand and disengaged her sticky hands. Izuku had a red face. You're welcome, Tsu. Tsuyu picked up a meat skewer that smelled delicious and her long tongue went out and swirled around the entire thing, gripped it tightly, and pulled all of the skewer's contents into her mouth. She moaned as she started to chew and the flavor of everything mixed together to explode in her mouth. I'm so glad you liked it. It's my first foray into exotic cooking. Inko gushed. Izuku was almost as excited as I was when our test dishes came out almost perfectly. Tsuyu had to finish chewing and swallowed before she spoke. You have more than this. We have tons of it. Inko said. I'm not sure where Izuku got all the money he's been getting lately. Izuku sighed. I told you, Mom. I sold several ideas to the UA support company. I don't understand how you can sell an idea. Inko said and crossed her arms. You have to work to earn money. Mitsuki laughed and put an arm over Inko's shoulder. Sometimes thinking and coming up with support hero things really is work, Inko. Inko frowned and then sighed. I suppose I have to accept that. Izuku looked at Tsuyu. We've got it all packed in containers at my home that's a couple of streets over. When we leave today, you can take them with you or I can have Tanya deliver them later. Why not both? Tanya asked as she came over. She wore a top like a sports bra and bicycle shorts, both solid black. She can take some of the smaller ones and I'll deliver the larger ones when she gets home. That's a great idea. Izuku said and gave his best friend a quick hug. It lessens both of your burdens and still accomplishes the task with only one trip each. I expect to be paid handsomely, you know. Tanya said with a wicked grin. My services don't come cheap. Izuku raised his eyebrows at her and she glanced down at his speedo. Oh. Okay. He walked around the table and turned his back to everyone, then he put his arms up in a flex pose to show exactly how much muscle he had in his biceps, then half twisted towards the table and posed, showing off his butt and his chest at the same time. How's that? You didn't quote All Might, so met. Tanya said with a shrug, which made the other girls giggle. They appreciated the effort even without the joke. Tanya didn't miss the hungry look on Bakugo's mother's face, though. She would need to keep a close eye on the older woman. She wasn't going to let some cougar steal her Izuku from her. She froze at that thought and turned away to examine her feelings. When did he become my Izuku? I don't remember making that claim before. Tanya thought and then went over their most recent interactions. Nothing came to mind, so she went back further in her memory and then her eyes widened. It was the first time she let him feel her butt. She had said that he didn't have her permission to touch another girl's butt and then let him grope her a little. Izuku walked back around the table to stand beside Tanya and grabbed a hamburger, oblivious to Tanya's mental gymnastics. He put the things he wanted on it, including cheese, and took a bite. That's good. Izuku said and put the burger down to enjoy the mouthful he had bitten off. Tanya, being quite bold, took his hand by the wrist and slipped it behind herself and then pressed it to her butt. Izuku's eyes widened and he quickly chewed and swallowed as his hand gripped one of Tanya's cheeks. That's so good. Tanya's face flushed red as his hand felt very, very nice holding her. She didn't know what this feeling was and she was pretty sure she shouldn't be enjoying it so much. Maybe it was because this was the first time they only had a thin piece of cloth between his hand and her butt. Her mind immediately went to the fact that she only had the shorts on and no underwear, and she wondered what his hand would feel like if her shorts were no longer in the way. The food is delicious and so manly. Kirishima said and raised a fist into the air. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks a lot. The others said in a chorus. Tanya's mind snapped back to reality and she realized that Izuku's hand had slipped up to her hip and he was now hugging her. She turned her head to look at him and her eyes widened as his gave her a brief kiss. Thank you. Izuku whispered, let her go, and picked up his hamburger again. With both hands. Tanya blushed as he continued to eat with the hand that had been grabbing her ass. What is this flushed feeling? Why am I reacting like this? She asked herself, confused. Izuku finished his food and took a drink, then he took her hand. Let's go rest before going back into the water. Oh okay. Tanya said and followed him to the reclining chairs and didn't protest as he laid down on one and dragged her onto it with him. It should have felt crowded with the two of them on it, especially since Izuku was fairly big and muscular. Instead, Tanya seemed to fit under his arm perfectly and her entire body rested against his like it was supposed to be there. Izuku. Tanya said and his arm tightened around her shoulders. I'm not letting you go, no matter what. Izuku whispered and she looked at his face in surprise. I don't care who or what you were before. It doesn't matter to me at all. Izuku. You are who you are and you know how much I care about you. Izuku said. You're only 15. Tanya whispered. Why else do you think I'm waiting to take you for myself? Izuku asked. What? Tanya asked, shocked. We could have sex right now and we'd both enjoy it, since we've developed so much physically over the last year. Izuku said. I'm in no rush, even though I can smash through a brick wall with the erections you give me. Tanya's hand rubbed over his chest absently as her face flushed to a very deep red. Izuku. I'm fighting very hard to not let another one out. I'm only wearing a speedo and there's no way it can contain me if I grow for you. Tanya's eyes went down to his crotch and saw the large soft bulge there that she had pointedly not looked at all day. Oh. Oh, my. Yeah. I should have brought a pair of shorts, just in case of growth and slippage. Tanya snorted and laughed a little, even though her blush didn't fade. I think you'd give Eureka a heart attack. Even though she peaked before. Especially after that. It's two very different monsters. Tanya said, wisely. Monsters? Haha. Izuku laughed and Tanya liked that sound. Thanks for inviting us all out for this. Momo said as she walked over and then sat down beside them on the reclining chair. It's been great so far. Mina said and plopped down onto her butt to land on the sand by their feet. I've never had so much fun. You guys always have the best ideas. Eureka said as she sat on a towel beside Mina, then Toru sat beside her. Soon all the guys were seated around them as well to rest and recover from eating so much. The day's not over yet, so we've got a few things planned for this afternoon. Izuku said. Please say it's volleyball. It's volleyball, right? Mina asked, excitedly. I thought Toru was the bubbly one. Siro, the elbow tape guy asked. I thought it was Eureka. Ida said and made a chopping motion with his hand. That started a healthy debate about which of the girls in class had the bubbliest personality. Tanya ignored everyone as she laid next to her best friend. His words about not caring who she was before or who she had been previously, had touched her deeply. She had confessed everything to him some time ago and he had accepted her completely. He had listened to her worries, her fears, and her goal to beat being X at his own game. Izuku promised to help in any way he could. It wasn't until this moment that Tanya realized he was completely serious. He meant every word that he said to her, even the jokes and digs at her expense, and she valued that above everything else in her life. Izuku was her best friend, even knowing everything there was to know about her, and that finally made her decision for her. Izuku, Tanya blushed and ducked her head down into his chest. She couldn't believe that she was actually saying it. She had been in denial for so long that she was struggling with making her mouth move to form the words properly. I want to be your. Do you want to be my partner in all things? Izuku asked, intentionally relieving all of the pressure Tanya was feeling about her identity. Tanya let out a shuddering sigh of relief, because she didn't have to actually say the words. Okay. When he didn't immediately grab her butt or fondled her, she lifted her head to look at his face. What? I'm not an idiot. Izuku said and she had to grin at him. I said we'll wait and we'll wait. How can you be so vexingly perfect? Tanya asked. You trained me well. Izuku said and hugged her close. The two of them laid there and let the other students' voices lull them into a relaxed mood. Chapter 19. Tanya was only slightly surprised that her relationship with Izuku hadn't changed much since they had agreed to be each other's significant other the past weekend. They still did their workouts, they still did their homework, and they did their quirk hobby during all of their spare time. The only real significant difference was that he would give her a kiss on the cheek in the mornings when they met on the train to go to school and when he got off at his stop. They had elections for class president that Monday and Tanya and Izuku recused themselves because of their busy schedules. The class eventually voted Momo into the position with Ida as her vice president. Everyone was happy with that and time moved on. It was now lunchtime on Wednesday and Tanya was in a very comfortable seat with him in the cafeteria. She wasn't sure why she was wanting him to try and push her boundaries, though. In the back of her mind, she was sure that her primitive mind fully expected him to be all handsy with her and was also slightly disappointed that he wasn't. Was there something wrong with her? Did he expect her to make the first move? BNNNN, BNNNN, BNNNN. The emergency buzzer blared through the cafeteria and everyone started panicking. Tanya grabbed Izuku's hand and they jumped up onto the table they were eating at. Shut you up. Everyone in the cafeteria froze at Tanya's command voice and turned to look at her. Everyone. Calm down and relax. We are in UA. None of us are civilians and we shouldn't panic like them. Izuku said and everyone looked a little guilty at that. Ida. You're near the windows. Look out and see what's there. Tanya ordered and saw the boy turn and hop up onto Kirishima's back. It looks like a bunch of reporters broke in and the teachers are intercepting them. Ida said. Great. Tanya said and looked at everyone. If you haven't wrecked your meals, sit down and finish them. If you did mess things up, proceed in an orderly manner back to your homeroom classes. Stop acting like a herd and act like heroes. About a third of the students sat back down to eat, as did Tanya and Izuku. Most of their class came back over to them and sat down. That was awesome. Eureka said and looked at her tray of food. I think the excitement made me lose my appetite. Then don't bother eating. I'm sure they are going to suspend classes for a day or two. Izuku said and started wrapping up the last of his meal. We can catch the afternoon train home in half an hour. That's a good idea. Ida said and copied Izuku in wrapping up his food. The others did the same and they shuffled off into the crowd and went back to their homerooms. Izuku had been right and classes were cancelled for the rest of the day and the next, so they caught the train and went home. Tanya went with Izuku to his place and calmed Inko down after letting her know what had happened. When the two teens were alone in his room later, Tanya pushed him onto the bed and laid down beside him. Tell me your thoughts. Tanya said. It's too convenient. Izuku said. UA has the best security and heroes patrol the grounds every few hours. The reporters were a distraction. Tanya added and he nodded. What were they after? Either information or revenge on someone. Since there were no reports of injuries, besides the ones caught in the student stampede. Tanya chuckled. You'd swear they weren't training to be heroes. Izuku nodded. I was just as surprised as you were that their first reaction was to panic. Momo and Ida were trying to physically restrain people from hurting each other. Tanya said and snuggled in close. It might have worked if there was only 24 or so other students. With nearly half of the student population of the school eating during the first lunch period, it was too much for our whole class to handle physically. Izuku said and then smiled. Except for us, that is. We don't count, remember? Like Eureka keeps saying, we're too awesome. Tanya joked. Izuku laughed and hugged her tighter. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were jealous. If I was jealous of her, she would be dead and no longer a problem. Tanya said and lifted her head to look into his eyes. I let her get away with slapping your ass during the battle trial because she really couldn't reach anything else, even if she enjoyed it a lot more than she should have. It actually hurt a little at the time. Izuku said. You heard the smack. She didn't hold back at all. He couldn't help but laugh again. If I wasn't so tough already, there would have been a solid handprint. Tanya laughed as well. That reminds me, Toru compiled the video with our whisper mic audio if you want to watch it. Okay, this I have to see. Izuku said and Tanya took out her phone to show him. They watched it for the entire length of the footage, which cut to several different angles to show people's faces as they talked. When it ended, Izuku was almost speechless. Toru did a great job. We should get whisper mics for everyone. Izuku said. I did one better. I gave the plans and chemical formulas to Momo and she created them to integrate into the collars of everyone's outfits. She doesn't feel guilty about it because they are custom made and can't be bought normally. Haha. That's great. Izuku said and kissed her cheek. What about Toru? It's embedded in the wrist part of her glove and the gain turned up slightly to compensate for not being on her neck. The earpiece is more difficult for her, since it'll be seen. We're working on it. Tanya said. Momo also has someone working on the software to let us all talk to each other, rather than limiting it into pairs like ours are. I don't think the individual pieces have enough hardware to handle 20 people talking at once. Izuku cautioned. We might need a central unit or two to handle the voice switching and to take the majority of the bandwidth load, that way we can choose who to talk to or send something to everyone. That's a good point. The relays would increase the transmission rate, too. Tanya said and she started typing on her phone. I'm letting Momo know. I'm sure that she can carry a node as can I. Maybe Eureka, too. She has a big belt with those air canisters on them and lots of room for electronics. Izuku nodded in agreement just as Tanya's phone beeped. Momo says you're a genius. Tanya said. Oh, and she'll send you a check for the idea. Her mother saw the text and is buying the idea from you. Izuku gave her an incredulous look for a second, then barked a laugh. Fine. I give up. Get the forms and we'll sign up as consultants for the UA support company. I can't stop giving people ideas to help them, so I might as well cut out the middleman and the long turnover time. Tanya laughed and hugged him close. The forms are already submitted. I'm just waiting for approval. Of course you are. Izuku said with a roll of his eyes. How long were you going to tease me about it? Another day, maybe two. Tanya said with a bit of her manic grin on her face. All right. Open the second drawer in my desk. Izuku said and he watched her get up and admired her backside as she walked over to the desk. You're staring at my ass, aren't you? Tanya asked as she opened the drawer. I always am. You know that. Izuku said. Move the top folder and grab the one under it. Tanya did so and brought it over to him as she climbed back onto the bed. What is it? Ideas. Day. Izuku said and she smacked his chest before dropping the folder there. Be nice. Tanya said and they both froze for a second, then they both barked a laugh at her joke. Izuku opened the folder and shuffled a few of the papers, then held one out to Tanya. Izuku. This is beautiful. Tanya exclaimed as she looked at a complete redesign for Momo's hero costume. It maximized the available space for her to use her quirk and eliminated a lot of the useless weight, namely the chemical formula dictionary and the large pouches across her hips to hide her bikini line. I did that before seeing her bathing suit. Or yours. Izuku said and his hand slid down her back and brushed the top of her butt. Thank you so much for allowing me to touch you. Tanya blushed a little and picked up her phone again and took a high-resolution picture of the paper. Izuku, you know I know and you know I know. Izuku said with a smirk. No pressure. Tanya glanced down at his crotch and back at his face before she smirked back. No. I'm not fighting against it this time. Izuku said with a shrug. Tell Momo to look up the Kevlar formula. If she can't find it, we can send her a sample to analyze. You're not giving her the formula for our outfits? Tanya asked, a little surprised. Proprietary patent. Izuku said and she raised her eyebrows at him. I only want us to have it. You could make a fortune if you released it. Every hero would wear it. Tanya said and sent the message and photo. Yes, and it would also be readily available for villains to either buy or steal. No thanks. That is a really good point. Tanya said and her phone rang. It's Momo. She hit speaker. Izuku. I love you. Momo yelled and both Tanya and Izuku laughed. You do realize it's Tanya's phone you just said that from? Izuku asked. Of course. She knows I only meant it as friends. Momo said. This design is wonderful. Its high mobility, skin exposure, and also strategic protection, is the best balance of needs and wants I've ever seen. You really are a genius. I just have a lot of spare brain power during class. Izuku said. Even with calculus? Momo asked. It's just numbers. Tanya and I would finish the questions in moments if the teacher didn't require to see our work. I sometimes work backwards and make stuff up to add and still get the right answer. Tanya said, proudly. I thoroughly enjoy making Power Loader's eyes twitch as he reads my homework. Izuku and Momo laughed. He has to check it and has no clue where I come up with some of the things I add in, even if they always work themselves back out of the equations. Tanya said with a smile. That's my girl. Izuku said, also proudly. Izuku. SHH. Tanya said and he chuckled. Momo? I know you have a great body, but, you don't have to show everyone a lot more than you're comfortable with. Izuku said. The last thing you need is to flash the guys in class when you have to make something big that your old costume can't handle. Momo was quiet for a moment. I'll do what I have to in order to be a hero. I'm not saying not to when it's necessary, because we won't know what we're going to face when we get out there, but, look at the small print down at the bottom of that image. Momo was quiet for a bit longer this time. Are you serious? Would that actually work? It would save your modesty when you need it to. Izuku said and saw Tanya read the small sentence. It's a last-ditch attempt and barely covers more than the essentials. You are a very considerate man, Izuku. Momo said. Thank you for this. I'll send. Your gratitude is more than enough for me, Momo. We're all friends, especially after the beach last week. That was really enjoyable. No one lost their bathing suits, either. Momo said. Much to the disappointment of the other boys. Tanya said. Not Izuku's. Momo asked. He didn't stare at Mina's pink boobs as she bounced all over the place. If that's not dedication to me, I don't know what is. Momo laughed out of the phone. She is a little shameless. Actually, I think she's a bit weird about people looking at her because of how she looks. If she can make people think more about how sexy she is or distract them with her body, making them ignore the pink coloration in her horns isn't that big of a deal for her. Izuku said. That, actually makes sense. Tanya said. Momo, can you? I'm already writing the text. Where do you want to meet at tomorrow? The mall. We need to relax after what happened at school and retail therapy always helps. Tanya suggested. I completely agree. Momo said. Are we doing an all-out invite like the beach? Sure. It's inside, so both Todoroki and Fumikage should show up. Izuku responded before Tanya could. Hopefully, no one's busy and we can all hang out. They do have a karaoke bar. Momo suggested. You might want to leave that out. There's no way you're getting most of the guys to go in there if they know beforehand. Tanya warned, which made Momo laugh. What about Izuku? Momo asked. I will do anything that Tanya wants me to do. Izuku said. That actually sounds sincere. Tanya said with a grin. That's me. Izuku, the sincere hero. Izuku joked and Tanya and Momo laughed. I better let you go. I'll send the message and call Mina personally. Momo said. All right. We'll talk to you later, Momo. Tanya said. Bye. Izuku said a little loudly. Momo hung up and Tanya put the phone aside. You're a great person, Izuku. Tanya said and took the folder from him and set it aside as well. Says the person that's my personal savior. Izuku said and held his arms open for her. Tanya didn't hesitate as she cuddled down next to him. You know that any decent human being would have done the same. Izuku chuckled. Nope. I'm not buying whatever you're selling. I've known a lot of decent people growing up and not a single one did anything to stop the ostracization or the bullying. Only you, my best friend, had the guts to call everyone out on it. Well, I had to get attention somehow and also make my triumphant middle school debut. Tanya said, which made him laugh and hug her harder. Actually, I'm joking. I only wanted to be left alone, do my time, and get to UA. I know. You were just like me and I wanted the same things. Izuku said and turned his head slightly to kiss her cheek. I think that's why we hit it off so well. Us being incredibly smart and everyone else being dumb as rocks didn't help at all, did it? Tanya asked, her voice full of mirth. Not even a little bit. Izuku said with a straight face, then they both burst into laughter. Chapter 20. The mall trip lasted for most of the day and the entire class of all 20 students showed up. It was almost like none of them ever went out except when others invited them out. The girls really enjoyed the shopping and chatting while the guys enjoyed hanging out and complained about the girls enjoying the shopping. It was a typical teenage outing, even if the girls had to literally drag the guys into the karaoke bar for supper. School was the next day and they all prepped for the time they missed, sure that the teachers were going to cram to make up for it. They were right and had to work and study hard for 2 days before Friday afternoon in their search and rescue class. It was going to be held at a hero-regulated facility called the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. The students were already in their hero costumes when they arrived at the building. Their comments about the different zones for rescuing as being perfect for practicing went almost unheard as 13, the rescue hero, gave them a long rundown of the rules. Just then, a large blackish-purple mass formed in the middle of the areas that was a sort of courtyard that led to each area. Villains started pouring out of it to form a large group of them that split as one last figure stepped out with a bunch of hands covering him. 13. Get everyone out of here. Aizawa shouted and ran towards the gathered villains. Right. Everyone, back to the entrance. I'm sorry, I can't allow that. A voice said as another blackish-purple mass formed between the students and the door. Step aside, extra. Bakugo shouted and made his hands pop and crackle with tiny explosions. Tanya and Izuku had watched and planned the last few seconds as the situation developed. Both masses are still there. Izuku whispered. Have you seen the difference? Yes. Tanya whispered back and let her rifle go to snap back to her back holster as she drew a toy pistol from her underarm holster with real penetrator ammo inside. Give me your shoulder. Izuku immediately knelt and she braced the pistol grip on his shoulder. 8 degrees up from center. It looks like a latch. Got it. Tanya said and charged the pistol and the ammo. She pulled the trigger, ignoring the argument between 13, the villain, and 3 students. It distracted the villain and that was all she needed to know. Hoop potting. Gahhk. The villain yelled as the penetrating pellet tore through the metallic neck brace he wore and lodged into his real neck, the only part of his body that his quirk didn't cover. 2 more shots hit beside that and his neck protector burst apart and crumpled as it fell to the floor. Die. Bakugo said and opened his fist right in the villain's face and let off his cannon blast. Boom. The villain was thrown back as the explosion impacted right on his completely exposed neck and he fell unconscious. As he did, he seemed to fold in on himself and then disappeared. Of course he ran scared. Bakugo said with a huff. He can't take it when real heroes fight back. Tanya and Izuku exchanged happy looks from Bakugo's inadvertent compliment, then Tanya holstered the pistol and drew her rifle again. Ida. 13 shouted. Run to the school and get the teachers. The communications aren't working. Yours aren't. Tanya said and touched the red button on the dedicated communications relay attached to her belt. Emergency. Code Zulu. Invasion by villains at the USJ. I repeat, Code Zulu. Acknowledged. Nizu's voice said from everyone's earpieces. We'll be there in 6 minutes. We can hold out for that long, sir. Out. Tanya said and looked at everyone's startled faces. What? You know the principal? Momo asked, shocked. Not the time. Tanya said and hefted her rifle to her own shoulder and took aim at the villains that Aizawa was fighting. She charged her rifle and started shooting normal doorbusters and not the specialty ammo. Villains started dropping from headshots around Aizawa and he turned slightly to see her. He nodded and went back to fighting. Izuku. Go. Tanya said. Flank them on the right. That big guy looks bad. Stay away from him. Understood. Izuku said as he was covered in little streaks of green lightning, then he was gone at his full speed. It shocked everyone else to see him practically disappear in a green flash. How the hell is he doing that? Bakugo asked, angrily. We're getting to the point that we're maxing out his exercise equipment. Tanya said and kept firing. Thanks to her modifications on the rifle, there was constant air pressure and a lot of shots in each ammo cartridge. Izuku ran around the right side of the large group of villains and started taking them down with punches to the head and neck that disabled them. He was moving much too fast for anyone to counter him. You kids are annoying me. We came here for All Might. Tamura, the head villain, shouted. NOMU. Kill Eraserhead and then kill those kids. Maybe All Might will show up then. The big guy named Nomu lunged forward as fast as Izuku was running and grabbed Aizawa's arm. There was a sickening snap as he squeezed, then he lifted Aizawa into the air. No. Izuku yelled and diverted towards the big guy. He poured all of his anger into his fist and felt one for all respond. His arm started to glow and the power responded to his desire to protect their teacher. He ran for all he was worth, ignored or ran through the villains trying to block him, and slammed his fist into the chest of Nomu. Waboom. Everyone froze as something like a sonic book shook the area and actually knocked a bunch of the villains away with the shock wave, including Tamura. No. It's not possible. Tamura exclaimed as he looked at the Nomu's caved-in chest. Aizawa was on the floor cradling his broken arm and even he stared at Izuku's fist buried into the large creature's chest. It was gasping for breath and it stared down at its own chest, wondering what had happened to it. I swore to protect everyone and become a hero that everyone can look up to. Izuku said and took a step back into a fighting stance as his feet started to glow brightly. I will not let you hurt the person trying their best to teach me how to do that. Suddenly, Izuku was upside down and both of his feet slammed into the Nomu's face, caved it in, and sent the large creature flying up into the air a fair distance. Tanya, I cleared your line of fire. He's all yours. Izuku calmly said as he changed his attention to the villains still gathered around. Who's next? Some of them shouted in fright and started running. Boom, boom, boom. The explosions rang through the USJ and everyone looked up at the source, even the villains who were running scared. Izuku took the opportunity to take them out as quickly as he could while they were distracted. The students, Aizawa and 13 stared up at the disintegrating form of the large Nomu. Both of its arms and one of its legs had been blown off as it reached the apex of the flight Izuku sent it on. A second later, one more explosion hit it and it plummeted to the floor of the arena as just a torso and head. Izuku? I can't get a reading from this far away. Is it dead? Tanya asked. Izuku stomped a villain into the floor and crushed his scorpion tail to stop it from stinging anyone. No, it's only disabled. I went all out on it and I was barely able to launch it. Shock absorption? Tanya asked. Izuku watched the thing falling and saw the tendrils starting to form on its shoulders. And regeneration. Probably a strength and reinforcement quirk as well. The Nomu thumped onto the floor of the arena and left a little crater. It's like he was designed to fight All Might. Izuku commented. He was. Tamura shouted and lunged at Izuku with his hands splayed. Izuku turned and slammed his fist into the man's chest, crushing one of the hands there and also part of the man's chest. Don't touch me, villain. Only my friends have my permission to do that. Tamura dropped to his knees and wheezed as he felt severe pain for the first time in his life. I had him. I know I had him. The stupid kid wasn't even looking. How did he do that? He asked himself and charged his hands with his quirk again. I'll get him this time. There was another explosion and a bunch of people made retching noises as the Nomu's head exploded into mist and the torso stopped twitching and regenerating. You must have a hard time seeing with that thing on your face. Izuku said and pulled the hand off. Ah. No. No. Give him back. Father. Father. Tamura yelled and covered his face with his hands to continue hiding his face. Unfortunately, the distraught man completely forgot that he was using his quirk. He didn't have the breath to scream as his face started to decay and crumble. Normally, people have some immunity to their quirks and powers, otherwise they would fall victim when they did something foolish or stupid. It was just too bad that Tamura was given his quirk by the villain All for One and didn't realize that he wasn't immune. The rot and decay quickly spread throughout the man's head and it started to cave in as his flesh and bones were eaten away. Aizawa saw this and used his capture scarf to hook the man's arms and pull them away from his face, but it was too late. The body fell over and the ash-like head hit the floor. It popped apart like a bubble and ash and blackish debris that could only be brains, flowed out like sand. Okay. You. Izuku said and stepped back. The main door smashed open and a large group of heroes ran in. Everything is fine now, for we are here. All Might yelled and posed in front of the other teachers. Perfect timing to help with the cleanup. Aizawa said and stood up. Does anyone have an aspirin? Sir, you need recovery girl. Izuku said and handed over the requested aspirin. Met. I'm too exhausted for that to work. Aizawa said and popped the 2 aspirin into his mouth and chewed them loudly. Come on. Let's get back to the others. What about the other villains? Izuku asked and waved at the retreating figures. Do you want to spend hours hunting down the dregs that can't leave except through the only door? Aizawa asked as if he was stupid. Izuku barked a laugh. I'd rather go thank my partner for saving us from that Nomu thing. Smart choice. Aizawa said and the 2 of them walked back towards where the rest of the class stood around talking. The heroes had already spread out to restrain the villains already knocked out and to go hunt down the evading ones. Tanya floated down to land beside Izuku. Good work, Izuku. Most of the underlings were just thugs. Izuku said with a shrug and then put his arm around her waist as they kept walking. I really had to pull my punches when a lot of them were just barely stronger than a civilian. I meant fighting the Nomu. Tanya said. Yeah, that was an experience. Izuku said and looked down at his fist. I used it at my full capacity. Really? Tanya asked, happily. Is that how you knew about the shock absorption? Izuku nodded. When I didn't launch him away with my first punch and only caved in his chest, I knew I had to get him in the air to reduce his resistance to your shots. You two work well together. Izuku commented when they reached the others. You should try not doing that to see what your potential could be. No thanks. Izuku and Tanya said at the same time and smiled at each other. We would rather keep our potential maxed and keep working together. Izuku said and Tanya nodded. Why weaken or limit ourselves when we know we can kick ass together? You won't always be together. Izuku said and then he felt a pressure on his mind and body that he hadn't felt before. He turned his head slowly and saw two identical looks of anger on Izuku's and Tanya's faces. Never say that to our faces again. Izuku said, his voice low and almost a growl. Tanya is my partner in all things and no one, not you, not the villains, and definitely no one else, will ever tell us we can't be together. I will split the heavens and the earth to stay by Izuku's side. Tanya promised and she did growl. Only he deserves my attention and like he said, no one will ever separate us. Wow, that's so manly and intense. Kirishima said and made a fist in the air. Izuku suddenly felt sleepy and his eyes started to close as his head drooped. Tanya pulled out a toy pistol and turned to point the gun at Midnight's chest. She fired and the doorbuster slammed into the woman's chest to send her flying across the waiting area. She slammed into the wall with a grunt and was knocked out. She slumped to the floor in a heap and everyone stared at Tanya. She was using her pheromones on my Izuku. Tanya said and shook him slightly. Izuku was now blinking his eyes and was still half asleep. Thanks. Now I'm doubly glad that we made those dossiers on the teachers and the effects their quirks have. Tanya said and she placed a hand on his chest. I'll flush your system. Izuku nodded and Tanya's hand glowed for a few moments. He felt instantly better and fully awake. Let's get out of here. Tanya said and made a mental note to report Midnight's assault on a student as soon as they were sitting on the bus. She didn't want that woman's version to be the first filed and when they were on the bus, she had Momo requisition the video footage and sent that along as well. No one touched her Izuku without her permission. Chapter 21. The press were all over the incident at the USJ, despite the principal's efforts to contain it. When there were that many witnesses, not including all of the villains, it was difficult to keep things under wraps. Nizu had thought he had done a spectacular job of it until the video appeared on social media and blew the entire cover story out of the water. How did they get audio? None of our cameras have audio as a security feature. Nizu thought and shook his head. He checked the footage access and found over 30 requests to review it and copies automatically sent out. He sighed at trying to track down the culprit until he noticed the filed complaints. Curious, he clicked on the section he hadn't checked yet and saw two of them. One was from Midnight and she complained about being shot and hurt by a student and wanted to file assault charges. The other complaint, filed before Midnight's, was by Tanya Degraff and she complained about a teacher assaulting another student and her having to take steps to stop it before permanent damage could be done with Midnight's pheromones. She used an incapacitating shot and not a harmful one with a video attached. The mouse-like Nizu watched it and he sighed as Tanya's complaint was validated. Midnight had snuck up near Izuku Midoriya and was directing her pheromones to the boy. He was falling under her powers and Tanya Degraff had hit her with a practically point-blank shot, a doorbuster she called it. It was slamming into the wall that caused Midnight's aches and pains. Nizu rubbed a paw over his little face and thought about cancelling both complaints out, just so he didn't have to deal with the repercussions. Unfortunately, Midnight was a faculty member and her proclivity to do what she wanted, had to be addressed. He was glad that Tanya hadn't waited long before filing her complaint, because it could have been classed as retaliation if Midnight's had gone through first. He wouldn't have to bring it to the Hero Association's attention, though. Since it happened during a school event and only involved a teacher and a student, he could keep it in-house and deal with it personally. He just hoped that Tanya didn't take it personally or held him responsible if she doesn't like Midnight's punishment for a first offense. Asterisk. That furry little bastard. Tanya said loudly as she read the result of her filed complaint. What did the principal do? Izuku asked as he lay on the bed and admired her standing there wearing just a bra and panties. They hadn't done anything sexual yet and he was sure that his patience was going to pay off soon as he watched Tanya pace back and forth, showing off her toned body to full effect. He gave that bitch 2 days suspension and docked her pay for those 2 days. Tanya said, a bit angrily. So, he gave her the weekend off. Izuku said and folded his hands behind his head. Yes. Tanya spat. What kind of punishment is that? He's probably thinking it's her first offense, officially reported that is, and anything harsher would look suspicious. Izuku offered and Tanya growled. I know. I don't agree, either. How many others has she seduced into unconsciousness? I'm just glad I noticed your exhaustion wasn't natural. Tanya said. So am I. Izuku said and let out a long and drawn-out sigh. It would make me feel so dirty if she had touched me anywhere, especially if I was drugged. Tanya nodded. She had seen a few things like that during her life and knew that the victims always felt that way, as if it was their fault. She put her phone down on the night table beside the bed and looked at her partner on his bed. His muscular arms, flexed like they were behind his head, really highlighted how big his chest was getting. Izuku was only 15 and yet he was fully grown, thanks to the enhancement quirks he had inherited from All Might. I like that look in your eyes. Izuku said, and Tanya's eyes snapped from his bare chest to his eyes. That one, too. Tanya had to smile. You're doing that pose intentionally. I always do. Izuku said and moved his arms down to hold his hands out to her. I know you're still confused, especially with all the hormones flooding through you. Tanya took his hands and let him pull her onto the bed. They are screaming at me that you are the perfect physical specimen. I think that's what the one for all quirk intends for the host. To become the most physically powerful being, to not only let it be used, but to allow everyone to see it being used. What about your hormones? Tanya asked as she rested her head on his pectoral muscle. I told you before. I could smash through a brick wall with how hard you make me. Izuku said. My mind is almost on the same page. It is, hey. Tanya asked as her hand lightly caressed his abdomen. I've never been so intellectually stimulated around anyone else, not even Momo, and she's a genius. Izuku said, and his hand caressed Tanya's lower back. If that's not a compliment you think you deserve, then I don't know what to say. Tanya chuckled and lifted her head to look at him. Am I really that attractive to you that a brunette bombshell with gigantic breasts can't stimulate you more than I can? I'd lift my boxers and show you, except I don't want to push you away or make you think that I only want to have sex with you. Izuku said and used his free hand to pull her down into a kiss. I love you, and if we eventually do get to spend, that kind of time together. Tanya nodded. It's going to mean a lot more than just sex between us would. A lot more. Izuku whispered, and the two of them cuddled without groping each other, even if the both of them secretly wanted the other to do just that. The response to the USJ video has been mixed. Tanya said as her fingertips lightly traced Izuku's abdomen muscles. I've gotten 3 hero agency requests and 5 admonishments for using unnecessary lethal force. Izuku chuckled. They know it was a construct and still said that? That's why we could go all out on it and not worry about hurting anyone. They can't trace the DNA to only one source, so they don't know if it was grown or transmuted from someone's body or multiple bodies. Tanya said. I would elect for grown. It had multiple quirks that shouldn't be possible for one being to contain safely. Izuku responded. Imagine going for a walk and having your feet absorb the shock constantly. Tanya thought about it. That's why it lumbered when it walked and could also lunge lightning fast. You got it. I bet it could barely feel itself move. That's probably also why it so easily crushed Izuku's arm. It didn't know it wasn't just grabbing on. Tanya nodded. Yes, going through life and not being able to tell where things were when you walked on them or grabbed them, would be horrible. I suspect it would be the same feeling when it's dark and you walk up the stairs and take one extra stair that wasn't there. Izuku said as an example, and both he and Tanya shuddered slightly at the mental imagery. It was such a jarring thing to do, and it threw off your whole body's rhythms for several seconds before you recovered. Having that feeling all of the time would be one of the worst things for someone to suffer through. Now imagine adding super strength, durability, and regeneration to that. Izuku said, and they both fell silent as they considered what kind of existence that Nomo had with conflicting quirks. Tanya was quiet for several minutes before she spoke again. Have you checked your own hero agency offers? No, and I can't realistically consider them. We're barely officially trained and won't have access to a provisional license until after the summer break. Izuku said and let his hand slide up her back and back down to her waist. That's also assuming the sports festival goes well and we have good hero agency placements. You won't consider the offers you have now at that point. Most offers usually only last a short time, and agencies making them now are just wasting their time, and ours. We are ahead of everyone in the class with how well we've trained ourselves up for fighting, but we also have no real experience with the proper procedures for handling things. Izuku said, and his hand moved down a bit more and his hand took a firm hold of Tanya's ass. Tanya moaned and pressed herself into his side. You're right. We are lacking a lot of information. It's too bad we couldn't get someone to teach us at our own pace and not have to snail it along like everyone else. Izuku laughed and his hand slipped back up to her waist. We would be graduated by the end of the year if we did that. Yeah, they would never do that. Tanya said with a sigh. Don't worry, Tanya. We'll get through this together, even if we have to take our time to get where we need to go. Beep. I've got another delivery. Tanya said and hopped up and started getting dressed. I'll be back later. I'll be here. Izuku said and handed her what she needed to dress faster. Thanks. Tanya said as she slipped her backpack on, and then she bent down to give him a kiss. She opened the window and jumped out before activating her quirk and took off like a rocket. Izuku waited to hear the sonic boom before he shut the window and laid back down on the bed. He never questioned why he was so comfortable with being practically naked with a girl in his bed. He chuckled and corrected that thought by changing girl to Tanya. She was his best friend and let him get away with a lot. He was sure that if he tried any of the things that he did with Tanya with another girl, he would be slapped, yelled at, and probably get kicked in the crotch. He laughed as he imagined outrage on some random girl's face and relaxed while he waited for his partner to come back to him. Asterisk. The weekend passed quickly, as did the next 2 weeks. The scheduled sports festival was still on, even after the villain attack on the students of Class 1A. Apparently, the footage of how the students had handled the incident had convinced the plans for the festival to remain the same. All they did was add extra security and seated well-known heroes all over the place to discourage any villain attack. It's not fair that we can't wear our costumes. Eureka said as the group of her friends and classmates walked down the entryway to enter the stadium. It is unfair, if everyone else had a costume. Which they don't. Izuku said. It would give some of us a completely unfair advantage if we had all of our equipment on us. I would take you all out with my pistols before we even left the starting area. Tanya said with a manic grin on her face. There's no way you could take out 11 classes of first-year students. Bakugo said. Them. Tanya laughed. I would only take out the competition, not the extras. Bakugo had to smile as she used his term for the people that don't really impact the results. You're both incorrigible. Izuku said and they both grinned at him. Well. If it isn't the stars of Class 1A. A mean and sarcastic voice said from the crowd. Don't bother answering. It's only the idiot of Class 1B spouting off. Todoroki warned. Hey. The mean voice said and he took a step forwards in a threatening manner. You have no right to say that to me. Spout. You are going to regret this. He said and reached out for Todoroki's arm. He suddenly felt a foot planted into his chest and flew backwards into several members of his class. Gah. He grunted, as did several of his classmates. He doesn't like people touching him without his permission. Izuku said and then he smiled as the students of Class 1B picked the wheezing boy up off of the ground. I'm sorry about that. We shouldn't have met under such angry conditions. He stepped forward and bowed slightly. I'm Izuku and it's a pleasure to meet most of you. That made a few of the students laugh. He is a bit of an egoist. A red-headed young woman said. I'm Itsuka. Izuku blinked his eyes for a moment. Our names sound very similar. The redhead nodded. I see you've had some martial arts practice. That was a nice forward kick. Thanks. I practice it every 2 days. Izuku responded. Why not every day? Itsuka asked, curious. My workout is too intense and extensive to only do in 1 day. That made all of the students around them look surprised. We're going to upgrade the weight machine again soon. Tanya said from beside him and her eyes went right to the guy with the softening quirk that had taken her recommendation spot. 4,000 pounds is getting a bit too easy for us, even with a dozen rep sets. That made a lot of them gasp, even their own classmates. Thank you all for coming to this year's sports festival. President Mike yelled over the loudspeakers, making everyone win CE. He gave a long speech about school unity and working together to become heroes, then told them to forget all of that because this was an individual competition to show off their skills. When you hear the gun go off, start the race. Tanya let the air around herself build and waited. As soon as the gun sounded, she launched herself. Not out towards the exit, though. She went right towards the idiot that had taken her spot, punched him up into the air, jumped and did a swing kick to hit him in the chest and threw him all the way back across the entrance area to slam into the wall, unconscious. Pathetic. Tanya spat, then let off a sonic boom as she flew out like a shot over everyone's shocked heads. Izuku wasn't idle, either. He ran over to Eureka, who was staring at the scene, and grabbed her by the shoulder. Make yourself weightless. Eureka shifted her surprised look to him, saw his desperate face, and did as he asked. You'll thank me for this later. Izuku said and took off running before he threw her as hard as he could. Ah! Eureka yelled as she soared through the air almost as fast as Tanya. They both passed through the area where a bunch of large robots started to activate. They were long past it by the time Izuku reached the robots and green lightning bolts covered him. He dodged those that he could and others he jumped and smashed through. There were 2 gigantic zero-pointer robots at the end of the area and he jumped at the one on the right. He drop-kicked the head and used it as a launching platform and jumped as hard as he could towards the next obstacle. Tanya passed that obstacle and flew over the minefield before landing just over the finish line. 34 seconds. President Mike announced as Tanya easily completed the course. Whoever designed the course without taking into account possible flyers or gliders, was, very short-sighted. Tanya commented. She was going to say an idiot and decided that discretion was a better choice than honesty this time. Eureka had to cancel her weightlessness because she couldn't change course. She landed just in front of the second obstacle and thought Izuku's idea was a great one. She took several steps back, ran as hard as she could, then made herself weightless as she jumped. She soared over the open pits of what looked like molten lava and landed on the other side. She felt a little nauseous and looked back to see Izuku running into view. She waved to him and started running towards the last obstacle, the minefield. Izuku saw Eureka wave and he didn't pause as he ran onto the tightrope wire connected to a platform 50 feet away. With his speed and agility, he made short work of it and made it to the large platform. Now it was a little trickier. The ropes were different sizes as were the platforms they went to. Multiple routes were available, so he quickly calculated out which was the best way and not necessarily the fastest. His choice made, he ran to the middle tightrope and jumped. He made it almost halfway along the 100-foot-long rope and grabbed on, then pulled himself up to the higher platform. Once there, he saw that his choice was the right one. From here, he easily plotted out a series of jumps and runs that would carry him clear of the obstacles safely and with minimal risk. Izuku was far ahead of his other classmates and ignored the shouts and hollers of the crowd as he crouched and then jumped. The gasps and cheers as he seemed to soar like Tanya towards his first landing area, made him happy that he had learned to adjust his position in midair from her. He landed to loud applause and then ran down another tightrope to another platform that he could jump from. Back at the finish line, Tanya clapped a few times as Eureka landed. He threw you, didn't he? He did. Eureka said and dropped to her knees in the grass beside the finish line. Ugh, I'm going to be sick. Here. Tanya said and handed her 2 anti-nausea pills in a water bottle. Eureka quickly swallowed both pills and drank half of the water in the bottle. Thanks. Before you ask, I always carry them, as does Izoku. We sometimes take our workouts a little far. Eureka laughed and sat down. No, really? She asked, sarcastically. Tanya smiled and sat down beside her. After the USJ, we've been pushing ourselves really hard. I can tell. The both of you are filling out your tracksuits and they are supposed to be bulky. Eureka said and plucked at her own top. I think it's supposed to make us all interchangeable and the only differences are our faces and heights. That's pretty stupid. Tanya said and looked over as Izoku approached the last obstacle. If we were more defined visually, the agency scouts wouldn't have such a hard time finding out who we are. I think that's why. Wait, what is Izoku doing? Eureka asked. He's clearing the way. Tanya said with a chuckle as she saw Izoku priming a massive double-handed punch towards the ground. I hope they can see the field again after. Kaboom, boom, boom, boom. The sounds of explosions rocked the entire stadium as the whole field exploded from the force that Izoku unleashed after smashing the ground and sending out shock waves. The fire and debris were barely moving out of the way and Izoku was already across the distance and crossed the finish line. Hello. Izoku said happily as rocks, dirt, and debris fell all around them. Show off. Tanya said with a grin and he nodded as he sat beside her. Thanks for giving me second place. Eureka said. You would have had it anyway if you had your costume. Izoku said. I thought it was only fair if I acted like a thruster for you. You could have just had her hold onto you while you ran. Tanya suggested. Too dangerous. She might be weightless but that doesn't mean she's without mass. Her extra momentum would have thrown off my jumps and my running across the tightropes. Eureka nodded. If I'm not careful with how I deactivate my quirk, I could hurt myself or others like that. Only with larger objects. You're pretty light and I doubt you would hurt anyone if you crashed into them. You're pretty soft. Izoku said and his face flushed a little red. I didn't mean it like. I only wanted to assure you that. You better stop your mouth before you put your foot in it again. Tanya warned him. I'm sorry. Izoku said and ducked his head. I only meant that Eureka was cute and cuddly. No one would be angry if she banged into them. Eureka blushed at the compliment and then had to clamp her mouth shut to stop her laugh when Tanya smacked Izoku on the back of the head. Ow. Izoku said and rubbed the spot. I warned you. Tanya said. You're lucky it wasn't my fist. Izoku nodded and they sat there in silence as they waited for the obstacle race to finish. Chapter 22. Momo crossed the finish line and came in next, thanks to Izoku clearing the minefield. The other students were too close for the festival organizers to reseed the thing and the third obstacle became only a series of craters and trenches. Bakugo and Todoroki tied for the next spot, their quirks making easy work of the obstacles. Eventually, 40 competitors crossed the finish line and they were all that were allowed to go on to the next event, something called a cavalry battle. The points awarded to the students during the obstacle course were printed out onto headbands and given out to the competitors. Most thought that was nice of them, then they were asked to form 4-man teams. It wasn't until the captains of those teams were chosen that the bands combined and the captain had to wear it on their foreheads. It was a race to grab the headbands of the other competitors to have the most at the end. There was just one problem. Tanya had won the obstacle course and had earned 10 million points. I'm glad we picked you as captain, Tanya. Toru, the invisible girl commented. Me, too. Eureka said. The looks everyone is giving us is kinda scary. Don't worry. Izoku said with a smile as he slipped off his tracksuit top to show everyone he was only wearing a small muscle shirt underneath. Good God. Eureka and Toru whispered and tried to not moan at the sight of Izoku's rippling muscles. That was quite difficult, because they were fairly short compared to him and their faces only reached his broad chest. I'll need your jackets, too. Izoku said as he tied his jacket around himself in a familiar strap configuration. Oh okay. Eureka said and took hers off to show she had a normal white t-shirt on underneath it. Toru was the same and handed her jacket over. Izoku quickly made them into similar strap configurations without destroying them and then wrapped Eureka in her own jacket and did the same to Toru. What are you idiots doing? Bakugo asked. He was already sitting on top of his own horse team. Winning. Izoku said and had Eureka kneel down behind Tanya's right foot and told her to hug the calf and to never let go as he attached the makeshift straps to Tanya's own jacket that she had twisted into a support harness. He did the same to Toru on Tanya's left leg, then he went behind Tanya and strapped his chest around her waist as he knelt, too. You idiots. You need to be in a horse configuration. Bakugo said with a laugh. I'm going to take your headband in seconds. I'm sorry, but no. Remember what I said before about taking out the competition? Tanya said with a manic grin. Everyone stand. Izoku, Eureka, and Toru stood as one and Tanya sat down at the same time. Every other competitor stared at the perfect chair that Izoku had made with Tanya's legs over Eureka's and Toru's shoulders with them hugging her calves. I think we're in trouble. Mina said from Bakugo's right leg. They can run like that and won't interfere with each other. Quick. Start copying them. One of the other students shouted. Welcome to the cavalry race. Present Mike announced and the other students groaned. He told them what had to be done and that quirk usage was allowed, as long as bodily harm wasn't caused intentionally. Bakugo likes that qualifier. Eureka said and the others nodded. Spread out and we can begin at the gunshot. Present Mike said and they did so. Good luck. The gunshot went off and the event started. The other teams started jockeying for position to assault the highest point total. Tanya, an air swirled around her team. Hold on tightly and lift your feet when we say. Izuku said and grabbed onto Tanya's hips as he charged his own quirk. What are you doing? Toru asked. Charging at full speed. Tanya said with a laugh as she floated. They expect us to run away and we are going to attack instead. I'm the engine and she's the driver. Izuku said and crouched slightly as he saw Bakugo's team rushing towards them. In 3, 2, 1. Now. Boom, boom. Bakugo's distraction explosion did nothing as Tanya's sonic boom matched it and dissipated the shockwave with an equal one. Izuku ran and carried the three girls like they waited nothing and ran as hard as he could towards Bakugo, who was caught completely off guard at the attack. In the next second, his head was bare and Tanya's team was past them and going for Todoroki's team. After them. Bakugo shouted and his team tried to turn and do just that. Tanya's team was already close to Todoroki, whom used a thin layer of ice on the ground to stop anyone from coming near. Ha! Amateur. She used her quirk to lift Izuku a fraction of an inch off of the ground and they flew right over the ice. What? Todoroki and his team yelled at the same time as Tanya's deft hand tore his headband off and she added it to the two she already wore. Only 5 more. Tanya said as they landed a short distance away and Izuku ran towards another team. This is totally unfair. I love it. Ha ha ha. Eureka shouted with amusement. Toru laughed as well and held on as instructed while her team made short work of gathering all 8 of the headbands in only a few minutes. Okay, now what? We have another 20 minutes before this thing ends and they are all gunning for us. Again. No problem. Tanya said and pat their heads. I hope you don't mind going for a bit of a flight. Izuku barked a laugh. So soon? How are they going to pick the people to fight in the tournament? Who cares? Tanya said and her quirk swirled around them. Izuku came to a stop and the 4 of them lifted off and flew up into the air. The maximum range of the quirks we know of is about 200 feet. I'm going up to 1,000 feet, so there's no need to worry. Tanya said and flew them up and up at a gentle speed and then came to a hover just where she said she would. They gently floated around to not present a stationary target. Wow, this is awesome. Eureka exclaimed. I've never been this high. Izuku chuckled. Tanya was this high when she was 5. You're kidding. Eureka responded. That's just, wow. You're going to wear that word out. Toru said and looked around. They all look like ants. Yet. Izuku agreed. It gives you a whole different perspective on things when you float up here for any length of time. You guys do that? Eureka asked. When we get the chance. Tanya said. It hasn't been very often lately. Things have been a bit crazy, haven't they? Toru asked. Everything seems to be happening to our class. Yet, 1B hasn't had anything happen to them at all. Eureka said. I think that's why that guy was upset. Both Izuku and Tanya barked a laugh. What is it? Eureka asked. He was faking it. Izuku said and saw her confusion. His outrage. He was using it as an excuse to grab Todoroki and steal his quirk. That's so underhanded. Eureka said, angrily. It would have worked if my Izuku hadn't been waiting for it. Tanya said, a bit proudly. We're just glad what's her name from 1B didn't separate herself into pieces and grab onto one of us before the obstacle race started. She could have been second place instead of you. Izuku said. What do you mean she can separate herself? Toru asked. Her quirk lets her divide herself up and float independently of the rest of her body. Izuku said. We haven't had enough time to observe and study her, though. Our guesses on her limits are pretty obscure right now. Tanya nodded and started to descend back down to the ground. We would need to watch one of the 1B training sessions to get a better handle on their abilities. Our requisition requests have all been denied. Izuku said as they floated down into the stadium. It's almost like the other teachers don't want us to know. Tanya snorted and then laughed. The fools don't realize that we don't need constant observations. Our notes are going to have a lot of updates after seeing them in action today. Izuku agreed. Hey, I just noticed. Why are we dropping down? Toru asked. The event is almost over. Tanya said and they touched down just before the buzzer sounded. The other teams that had been gathering to attack let out growls of frustration. The winners of the cavalry race, everyone. Present Mike announced and there were only a smattering of applause. Izuku started to untie himself from Tanya and spoke very loudly. You have all forgotten how we grabbed all of the headbands in the first place. Yet. We kicked ass. Eureka shouted. They don't care. Us floating around out of reach after that wasn't entertaining. Tanya said and floated so that Izuku could finish untying himself and the other 2 girls without having them kneel. How did you know to do this, anyway? Eureka asked as Izuku loosened the coat tied around her. Tanya has to deliver multiple packages sometimes and can't always carry them in her normal satchel. Izuku said. We adapted several different strapping techniques to secure odd-sized packages to keep them safe from harm. That's so great. Eureka exclaimed and Tanya nodded as she landed beside her. We've got an hour or so before the scheduled one-on-one fights, so we should go find our seats. Izuku said and the others agreed. You cheaters. Bakugo shouted and ran over towards them with his hands sparking. Izuku stood in front of Tanya and glared at his childhood friend. Kaken, if you say anything else like that, I'll have no choice but to show you how wrong you are. He said and made a fist that green lightning flowed around. We are all allowed to use our quirks. Tanya did so. Get over yourself. Bakugo slid to a stop and stared at Izuku's angry face, which was something he had never seen before. Save your anger for the fights. Momo advised as she walked over. It might not have been sporting to fly away, but it's not against the rules. Trying to blow people up isn't sporting, either. Tanya said. If I hadn't countered Bakugo's attack, Eureka and Toru could have been seriously hurt. I wasn't aiming for them. Bakugo shouted. I know, which is why they would have been caught in the blast. Tanya said. I was sitting on their shoulders and their faces were right where your hands were aiming to knock me off my horse. That made a few people uncomfortable, because they hadn't considered that aspect of the cavalry race. They were only concerned about getting the headbands. That's why we removed the temptation. Izuku said and then chuckled at their surprised expressions. You could have some fun chasing each other with no stakes and you only stood around and waited. That doesn't matter now. Tanya said. Let's go grab our seats and watch the other students have fun. They all nodded and walked over to where their class should have seats and a hero wearing a bear costume directed them to the right places. Izuku, you can put your tracksuit jacket back on. Tanya whispered to him. Izuku gave her a crooked smile. Is someone trying to keep me under wraps? Yes. Tanya responded and pointed to the jacket that was still tied around his waist. Izuku chuckled and untied it before shaking it out and putting it on. Happy now? Am I happy that the girls in the other hero class aren't staring at you with their tongues hanging out? Yes. Tanya said and watched him turn his head to see several of the girls blushing and turn their own heads away. I didn't meant to draw their attention. Izuku whispered as he looked back at Tanya. I know they can't help it. You've become quite the attraction. Tanya whispered back and leaned close. What's that American slang for a well-muscled guy? Izuku asked and put his arm over her shoulders. Beefcake. Eureka said from Tanya's other side and then slapped a hand over her mouth. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to listen in. Tanya chuckled. If we wanted to keep our conversation completely private, we would use our whisper mics and earpieces. She pat Eureka's knee. It's okay for friends to overhear us. Is that what I am? A beefcake? Izuku asked. Yes, and now I'm wondering what kind of icing goes on a beefcake. Tanya joked. Whipped cream. Eureka said immediately. Her eyes widened for a moment before she saw the huge smiles on Tanya's and Izuku's faces, then the three of them started laughing. Asterisk. The events for the other students that were just filling in the time before the fighting matches, were really entertaining. It let them all showcase their skills and quirks, which made Izuku and Tanya very happy. They didn't have a journal to write in, though. It was enjoyable anyway and they would write out what they remembered later. They were more like recreational activities and games, like a large ball roll race what they students had to keep in their lanes and get to the finish, and a scavenger hunt. Izuku and the others that qualified for the fighting tournament decided to not participate, since watching would give them time to recover and prepare for the fights to come. Chapter 23. The fights were by random draw and no one knew who they would be facing in the tournament. I think we should recuse ourselves. Tanya said to Izuku as they stood in the waiting area while waiting for the draws. I was thinking the same thing. Izuku said. We're so far above everyone else. Don't you dare drop out. Bakugo shouted across the room and everyone stopped talking and looked over at him. He stalked over to Izuku and glared at him. I've been waiting all this time to fight you and you aren't robbing me of my chance. Kaken, I can beat the teachers in a fight. Izuku said. Not all might. Bakugo exclaimed. Actually. You are staying in this tournament and that's that. Bakugo shouted. That's not really your decision to make. Tanya said. You stay out of this, you, Bakugo started to say and a palm hit him in the chest and launched him 20 feet across the large room. He hit the floor and slid 10 more feet before he came to a stop. No one talks to Tanya like that. Izuku said, his entire body flickering with green lightning around it. If you want a fight, then you've got it. He turned to look at the shocked judges. Who are the first draws? Izuku Midoriya and Shoto Todoroki. Samantha said. I'm sorry I have to crush you, Todoroki. Izuku said and turned to Tanya. He gave her cheek a quick kiss, because he knew she wasn't comfortable with doing that in public. I'll be right back. I know. Tanya said with a smirk and watched him leave with a slightly angry Todoroki walking behind him. We have to do the other draws first. 13 yelled after them. Do them fast. Tanya said and the two teachers did so. The first round was set and the students jogged out to take their seats. Izuku and Todoroki were already in the large square arena that Cementos had constructed for it and were waiting for the start signal. Present Mike announced the rules about knockouts, immobility, ringouts, and surrenders as the only reasons to end the fight. Todoroki smiled as he prepared his attack. Izuku knew what was coming and was ready for it. As soon as the start signal was given, Todoroki used his ice quirk to create a massive glacier that covered half of the fighting area and encased Izuku inside of it. You knew it was going to be quick. Todoroki said, a bit smugly. You were just wrong about the outcome. There was silence for several seconds, then the fighting arena started to shake slightly. The glacier shivered for several more seconds, then it exploded into millions of pieces. Todoroki had to duck several large pieces and then stood to see Izuku standing in an ice crater and that most of the glacier was gone. My turn. Izuku said, and he practically glowed green as the lightning moved around him at the speed of light. Todoroki saw the expression on Izuku's face and for the first time in his school life, felt the same thing for Izuku that he felt for his father. Fear. He desperately tried to use more ice to block Izuku from reaching him, and Izuku grinned as he ran at full speed through the ice blockages, even the ice spikes, and grabbed Todoroki by the neck as he ran right over to the edge of the ring and casually dropped him off onto the grass. Ring out. Present Mike shouted. What a match. The crowd was quiet for a second, then they cheered loudly. The spikes, Todoroki mumbled. Easily avoided and knocked aside when someone is near invulnerable. Izuku said. Now you know why Tanya and I were wanting to withdraw. We can't show off with our opponents so much weaker than us. I'm not weak. Todoroki shouted. I said weaker than us. Izuku said and hopped off the fighting area, used a finger to carve out a square that was a foot wide, and held it up. He then crushed it into dust by only pushing his hands together and making fists. Any more questions? Todoroki stared at him and didn't know what to say as Izuku wiped his dusty hands off. Come on. The others are waiting for us. Izuku said and picked Todoroki up to stand him on his feet, then they walked away back towards the seating area for the fight contestants. Wow. That was awesome. Eureka exclaimed when Izuku was close enough. It was a waste of time and eliminated a good fighter. Izuku said with a sigh. It would have been a more enjoyable fight if Todoroki had been matched up with a more appropriate opponent. Wait, not you. Toru, the invisible girl asked, surprised. No, only Tanya has a chance against me. Izuku said and sat down beside her. You're such a liar. Tanya said with a laugh. If you stay aloft and only attack my blind spots. Tanya shook her head. Not a chance. You grab me on the way by and I'm toast. So, should we show them a fighting demonstration? Izuku asked. I guess we can get away with a training session. Tanya said, clearly amused. You're talking like you're going to be the last fight. Momo said. We are. Izuku said. Like I told Todoroki, Tanya and I should have withdrawn. The fights we have against others are completely one-sided. That's awfully arrogant, and a little manly. Kirishima said with a grin. Izuku chuckled. If this had happened a couple weeks after the entrance exam, it would have been more sporting. As it stands now, the both of us are in a weight class above some of the top heroes. Tanya said. Can you show us some of your training techniques? Eureka asked. We can. The problem is, our base strength is quite far above what it used to be. Izuku said. You saw me crush that concrete Cementos made. If he had used rebar to reinforce it, it wouldn't have made any difference to my demonstration. Hold on. If you're that strong, Toru started to say. I've been taking control lessons from a certain trainer that's had a lot of experience using super strength in normal everyday activities. Izuku answered before she finished her question. You can't tell us who? Toru asked. I'm sorry. We agreed that if he helped, it would be in secret. Izuku responded. I wonder if he would be okay with it at the end of our demonstration. Tanya asked. We would have to clarify that he only helped us with our strength training and not our fighting prowess. I don't think it will matter. We're not holding back, are we? Tanya asked with a little manic smile. Izuku barked a laugh. We'll have to talk to Cementos and have him expand the fighting area for the final fight. It's nowhere near the size of the beach. That's a good point. I'll be right back. Tanya said and quickly left the seating area. Are you too serious? Eureka asked. Izuku nodded. She will probably have them rearrange our fights to be the last ones in each matchup. That's, well, Eureka looked thoughtful. It's not fair for the rest of the students to suffer for our abilities. Izuku said and lightly touched her shoulder. Eureka looked up at his face. You can really take any of us out so quickly. Izuku nodded again. It's part of our hobby. That made a few of the students have surprised faces. I easily took Todoroki out because he is deficient with his quirk when up close. He can't handle having someone within his personal space and it flusters him. Todoroki looked angry for a few seconds, then he sighed. Damn it, you're right. Tanya and I can work with you and get you used to dealing with close attackers if you want. Izuku offered and he looked genuinely shocked. Why would you do that? Todoroki asked. We're all going to be heroes. If we can remove as many of our bad habits as possible, we can only become better heroes, right? Now they all had thoughtful looks. You really are a good guy. Eureka whispered. Izuku grinned. Mostly. I didn't have a great childhood until Tanya showed up in my life. After that, I had something to fight for. If anyone crosses her or hurts her, his grin faded and a few bolts of green lightning flowed across his face. And I will make them pay. I love you, too. Tanya said as she sat down beside him and kissed his cheek. Cementos and the other teachers didn't believe me, so we have to make short work of our opponents. It's not like we have much choice. Izuku said and turned his head to look at the other contestants, even those from the other classes. I'm sorry about this. I really am. A lot of shrugs greeted his words. The Class 1B students had heard everything he said and they couldn't really hold it against him. The couple of students from the general courses looked slightly angry, especially one tall and skinny guy with bluish-colored hair. Being denied a chance to show off was not sitting well with them. This was their only chance to do it until next year. The two contestants fighting now finished their fight and came back to the seating area, and Tanya was called up to fight against Bakugo. Izuku gave Tanya a good luck kiss on the cheek and he watched her go to the arena. I'm going to wipe the floor with her. Bakugo nearly shouted as he followed her. Izuku shook his head when they were far enough away to not hear. It's a bad matchup. Tanya has already proven she can counter his explosions with pressure waves. She's going to tear him apart if he relies too much on his quirk. Can she create sonic booms that quickly? Toru asked. Izuku laughed softly. She has to fight to go slow enough to not create them when she uses her quirk. Everyone stared at him like he was crazy. Just watch. This will be over in. Start. Present Mike said, and then there were two very loud booms. One from an explosion and one from a sonic boom, then there was a second sonic boom and Bakugo flew out of the dust his explosion had created and landed well outside the fighting area. There was a swirl of wind and Tanya blew away the dust and debris to clear it away for everyone to see her hovering 20 feet above the arena floor. Ring out. Present Mike said. Winner. Tanya Degrove. Tanya waved at the stunned teachers and judges and flew over to where Izuku was clapping. He was the only one. I tried to convince him to not blow up the concrete to block my sight. Izuku chuckled and gave her a hug as she landed. He only made it more difficult for himself. Tanya nodded. Blocking your own sight while trying to hinder who you are fighting isn't the smartest thing to do. It's a desperation move and shows that you are unsure of how to fight your opponent. He probably thought it would be worth it if he evened the playing field. Momo said. But, it didn't. Izuku said. Tanya could have been blindfolded and she still would have seen him. Also heard, smelled, and felt him moving through the air. Tanya said. The last is kind of my specialty. Which she taught me to adapt with my quirk. I can sense local disturbances as well and my hearing is as strong as hers while my nose can catch almost as much scent. Izuku said. I don't have the same mental library of smells as she does, though. Not everyone has gone through what I have. Tanya said and leaned against him as Eureka and Momo were called up to fight. Good luck, you two. Thanks. Thank you. They said at the same time and walked over to the repaired fighting area. Momo came out on top and that was only because she had extensive combat training with a bow staff and had countered nearly everything Eureka could throw at her. The rest of the fighters had their turns and Izuku and Tanya were especially interested in how Class 1B and the general course students fought. When they showed off their quirks, both Tanya and Izuku figured out how they worked and also how to beat them. Izuku fought the opponents in his bracket and tore through them like they were standing still. Tanya did the same with her opponents and no one could counter what they were doing, even after seeing them do the exact same thing to each of the people they fought. There didn't seem to be any counter. It wasn't until Izuku came to fight Ida that everyone had a hope that his speed would stop Izuku's complete domination. I've figured out your strategy. Ida said and prepared to go all out. His leg engines revving high. I'm sorry that you assumed I'm going to do the same thing to you. Izuku said and crouched slightly as the green lightning flowed over him and made him glow. Start. Present Mike yelled. Ha. Ida shouted and started to run. Just as Izuku brought his hands together with so much speed and force that he created his own sonic boom and pressure wave. Ida had barely taken 3 steps before the shock wave hit him and blew him out of the arena. The entire crowd was deathly silent at what they had just seen. Ring oh out. Present Mike said with his voice cracking slightly. Winner. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku walked over to the shocked Ida that was laying on the grass beside the arena. Never assume you know everything about your opponent. He said and held a hand out to him. Ida took the hand and braced to stand up. You knocked out my engines. Izuku smiled. Your exhaust is completely exposed, even on your hero costume. Clog it even a little or have enough pressure around them and you stall out. Ida blinked his eyes for several moments. But, you just said. When you call the UA support company for your updated costume, it has flares, filters, and alternate exhausts installed for you. Izuku said and they walked back over to the seating area. Are you serious? Ida asked, still shocked. Izuku nodded. Tanya and I signed exclusive contracts for ideas with them. They've already retooled the upgrades and added them to Ingenium's costume after contacting the Tanya family's normal support company. Ida put a hand on his shoulder and brought him to a stop. Izuku, thank you. Izuku smiled. Like I said before, we're all going to be heroes. Getting rid of our weaknesses will only make us that much better. Ida smiled back and nodded. They finished walking over to the seats and sat down. I'm only slightly surprised that you used your special move already. Tanya said with a huge grin on her face. Izuku laughed and hugged her with one arm. Did you notice that the crowd didn't react at all? Neither did our friends and classmates. Tanya said and leaned against him. They are probably wondering what else we can do. Izuku whispered. Only one more match for each of us and then it's going to be us against each other. Tanya said in a normal voice. I know. I can't wait. Izuku said. Are we keeping our speed down? Tanya asked. At first. Izuku said and let a small manic smile that was similar to Tanya's show. Tanya laughed softly and nodded. She completely agreed that they could step up the show as the fight progressed. She knew she was outclassed strength-wise, since Izuku's quirk gave him proportionate strength the more he trained it, and she had to channel more magic into her body and fists to compensate. Our fight is going to be awesome. Tanya whispered and kissed his cheek. Chapter 24. Izuku's last fight was with the tall guy with bluish-colored hair, whom kept trying to goad him into talking. When Izuku didn't respond to his taunts, as soon as the announcer yelled start, he gave up. Izuku walked over to him and held out his hand. I'm sorry you couldn't showcase your quirk better than the opponents you already fought. The guy gave him an odd look as he shook the offered hand. Why are you apologizing? Your quirk is really interesting. It can be used for both villain arrests and for support rescues. Izuku said, and the guy looked shocked. Even if you are limited by people responding to you, you can get people to stay calm in stressful situations and can have almost any villain, who always loves to talk anyway, give themselves up before they realize what's going on. You're the only student that hasn't told me I had a villain quirk. The guy said. Izuku barked a laugh. Villains have a different mindset than people like us. They think because they have powers that they can do whatever they want. They are usually full of themselves and believe they can get away with everything. People like us. The guy thought and had to smile. I'm Shinso Hitachi. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku said and motioned towards the seats. Have you tried using your quirk on multiple people at once? What? I'm just wondering if you could spread it out. Say there's a few guys in a gang or something committing a crime, you call out and only one responds. You can get them to convince the others to back off, drop his weapon, have him run away, give up, or even get the others to respond to you. Izuku said and saw the pensive look on Shinso's face. The biggest thing I'd like to know is what's the limit of your quirk? What do you mean? Shinso asked. Can you only do it once? How long does it last? If the person you're using it on is commanded to always respond to you while your quirk is active, can you keep using your quirk on them until you're exhausted? Do they build up a resistance to it the more you use it? Shinso's mouth dropped open. You. There were several laughs as they reached the seats. Izuku, you need to stop blowing people's minds. Tanya said and pulled him down onto his seat. I'm sorry I can't turn my brain off. You know that. Izuku said and hugged her. Can we talk again later? Shinso asked. Sure. There's a gathering after the tournament that lasts for an hour. Izuku said. Aren't you going to need to recover after your fight? Yurika asked. I might need about 15 minutes, assuming Tanya doesn't break anything. Izuku responded. If she does, then recovery girl can handle it. You're pretty relaxed about getting bones broken and getting in fights. Shinso commented. I've been doing things like that since I was a kid. Izuku admitted and pointedly didn't look at Bakugo. My Izuku has always been pretty tough. Tanya said, proudly. She saw his face flush a little red and kissed his cheek. Wish me luck. You don't need it, but, good luck ending it quickly. Izuku said and she nodded just as her name was called with a green-haired girl named Iberi Shiozaki. The match lasted almost 10 seconds. Iberi's hair was actually vines and she could call hundreds of them and use them to cover herself like a shield, and then other vines burst out all over the fighting area. Tanya, since she could fly, wasn't bothered by it in the least. In fact, all of the debris the vines had made, gave her a lot of projectiles. Like she did with the baseball during the quirk assessment test, she charged them up and launched them all over the shield the girl was using. Once a hole was made big enough, a quick sonic boom directed at the hole and the shockwave reverberated inside the shield and knocked the girl out. Knockout. Present Mike yelled. Winner. Tanya Degrov. He said in a normal voice. We will take a short 20-minute break to let her recover and then the final match will commence. Tanya went over to the collapsed vines and moved them out of the way to check on the girl and held her hands out to her. A couple of quick healing spells had the girl awake and fine, long before the medics could come out to retrieve her. What? Where? Iberi looked around to see the piles of vines. You lost. Tanya said and helped the girl to stand. If you want some advice. I don't even know what happened. Iberi said, confused. Tanya chuckled. We can get you a copy of the fight later. The girl nodded and went with the medics to get checked out while Tanya went back to her seat. 10 seconds? You're getting slow. Izuku joked and she whacked his arm. I let her get her defenses up to let people see what she can do. Tanya said and smiled wickedly. I also let her make me a bunch of projectiles. That made Izuku laugh and he nodded. They had both gained advantages from Tanya's tactics. Are we starting blow for blow or are we matching? Tanya asked. Definitely matching. We can up the show as we progress. Izuku said and she nodded in agreement. I can't wait to see this. Yurika said, clearly excited. I think everyone's going to react to it. Izuku said and looked at the huge crowd. It's a little odd that they are so quiet after seeing that. It's more disappointment, I think. Tanya shrugged. I warned the teachers and judges about it. There goes Cementos to fix the ring. Toru, the invisible girl said and pointed. The students watched as the hero easily fixed the ring and he glanced over at Tanya and Izuku. He nodded and started to expand the fighting area to a much larger size. He left only about 10 feet of grass to the sides of the stadium, which had everyone talking. I'm glad he took my advice. Tanya said. We can't disappoint him. Izuku said and they both stood. Far corners after the introduction and greeting. Of course. We need to show them some of our speed before we're moving too fast for them to see us. Izuku chuckled and kept his arm around her waist as they approached the center of the very large fighting area. Welcome to the final fight of the tournament. Present Mike yelled and the crowd cheered a little. Oh, come on. I know some of the matches were a little disappointing because they were over so quickly. A series of boos came back from the crowd. You're in for a real treat this time. The final two competitors are Izuku Midoriya and Tanya Degruf. A few shouts yelled out that it was going to be another short fight. Izuku turned Tanya to him and looked into her eyes as he hugged her. Let's give them something they are always going to remember. Tanya grinned and nodded. I'm sure that we can. Izuku leaned down slightly and kissed her soundly. Tanya's arms went around him and they kissed for 30 seconds before they broke it. Both of them were blushing and heard a lot of whistles, catcalls, and other things. They each took one step back and made a fist to bump into each other, then they turned around and quickly walked all the way to opposite corners. Here it is, folks. The final fight. Present Mike said. Start. Tanya and Izuku took several seconds to charge up. One with air swirling around her and the other with green lightning flowing over him. Both launched towards each other and crushed the parts of the fighting area they had been standing on a moment before. A second later, they had both punched and their fists slammed into each other in the very center of the fighting area. Boom. The sound echoed and the pressure wave it released flowed out and fluttered people's clothes that were in the first few rows of the stadium. There was silence for a second, then the crowd burst out of their seats and cheered. Let's do this. Izuku said and they dashed backwards to take up different positions, then they launched at each other again and again. Fists matched, waist-high kicks slammed their shins together to match blocks, and the booms and pressure waves continued on and on. Their moves became faster as they moved across the fighting area towards different parts of the stadium to give the crowds a better view of them exchanging blows. Their fighting styles started to differ and then Izuku took a kick to the chest and was flung across the arena. He had to dig his fingers into the concrete floor to stop himself from leaving the ring and smiled as he came to a stop. Tanya was right there with her punch aimed at his head and Izuku jumped to give her an uppercut. It caught her chin and she was launched high up into the air and flipped over several times. Izuku braced and jumped up into the air about 100 feet and swung a double fist down to hit her in the stomach. Tanya was expecting that and grabbed his hands as she dodged and then planted a knee into the back of his neck as hard as she could. Izuku grunted as he was literally shoved down through the air face first and covered his face just as he hit the fighting area floor at near terminal velocity. It created a crater 10 feet across and kicked up some dirt and debris that quickly dissipated. Tanya flew down, making a sonic boom, and put both of her feet into Izuku's back. Ha! The crater deepened and widened slightly from the impact and she hopped out of the hole and hovered in the air off to the side as she took a fighting stance. The crowd was cheering as Izuku stood up and brushed the dirt off of the front of his slightly tattered and torn tracksuit top. Oh, it's on now. Izuku said and grabbed the shoulders of his top and pulled to the sides. The fabric tore and he tossed the pieces aside. He turned to look at her and gave her a wicked smile as his muscles seemed to ripple in anticipation. Uh-oh. Tanya said and turned to fly away just as Izuku lunged at her. He tackled her and they flipped over a couple of times before they landed with Izuku on the bottom. Tanya wasn't going to give up the advantage and made her hands glow as she shoved her fists onto his chest. Izuku grunted as he was shoved almost a foot down into the cement floor, then he grabbed one of her wrists and bent his arm to shove an elbow into the side of Tanya's throat. Gah! Tanya yelled as she was tossed aside from the strength of the blow and landed 15 feet away. She looked up and saw Izuku's foot coming for her face. Her arms flung up and blocked the hit on her forearms as she was pushed back another 10 feet, then she stood and used her speed as she did a roundhouse kick to the side of the head before he could react. The impact swung Izuku around in a circle and then it was his turn to be kicked up into the air. He didn't see the follow-up kick that shoved him down into the arena floor and he made a much bigger crater this time. He knew he was making a lot of debris for her to use against him later, so he made a bit of a show by grabbing one of the large slabs of concrete he had loosened and tossed it at her. The crowd gasped as the several hundred pounds of concrete soared through the air like it was weightless and Tanya barely dodged it. She wasn't going to take that shot without returning it, so she flew over to the thing as it reached the apex of its flight and caught it from underneath. The crowd gasped again as she charged it up and then she flung it at her opponent at a significant speed that wasn't normal at all for something so big. Ha! Nice one. Izuku laughed and readied a punch that was covered in a green glow. His hand shot out just as the projectile was about to crush him and he jumped at the same time. The concrete shattered from his punch and seemed to explode as Izuku flew through the debris towards his target with his glowing fist. Sucker! Tanya taunted and ducked his lazy punch, grabbed one of his legs, and started to spin in place like she did before throwing the baseball in the assessment test. She created a whirlwind that no one could see through, then Izuku appeared for an instant before he hit the arena floor like a meteorite and tore up over 100 feet of concrete in a huge trench before he finally came to a stop. The entire crowd was silent as they waited to see if he was going to get up. Izuku's laugh cut through the silence and he stood up to show he only had a pair of shorts on, because the tatters of his muscle shirt fell off. If we weren't fighting in a tournament, I could swear you were intentionally trying to strip me off. Tanya pulled out several pieces of debris from her pockets that she had caught before and smiled. Who said I wasn't? Izuku laughed and then felt the air near him distort. He moved his chest to twist to the side and the piece of concrete Tanya threw buried itself in the torn up ground behind him. I can't throw anything back because it could hit the spectators. Izuku said and ducked the next shot. How about I make a shield instead? He asked and then he punched the soft ground on the side of the trench. It pushed up the concrete arena floor around the trench by several feet and Izuku quickly lifted up a 30-foot wide and 20-foot long chunk of it. He easily held it in front of himself and blocked all of Tanya's follow-up shots, even when she tried to fly around him. Izuku heard a sonic boom and knew what was going to happen next. He dropped the impromptu shield and turned to catch Tanya as she slammed into him with a full-body tackle. They hit the ground and dug up another trench for 20 feet and when they came to a stop, they exchanged punches almost faster than the eye could see. Booms from their punches and kicks echoed all over the arena as they fought ferociously. Everyone stared at them as they pounded each other on their backs, sides, heads, arms, and legs. Their speed started to pick up and they would disappear from one area and then appear in another as they landed punches and kicks. The cameras were having a hard time keeping up with them as they continued to fight, tearing up the arena almost completely. There was one significantly loud boom and then they separated and landed about 30 feet apart in the center of the ring. One, last, attack. Tanya asked, almost breathless. Make it, a good one. Izuku said, covered in sweat and panting heavily. Tanya gave him a manic grin as she started to float up into the air, then she shot up like a cannon and a sonic boom and pressure wave followed her as she disappeared from sight. There was another boom, then another, and then a streak of air zoomed into the arena from nearly straight down towards Izuku. At the last second, Izuku blurred as he stepped to the side and swung his fist. It connected with Tanya's cheek and changed her momentum from straight at him to the side. She slammed into the churned up dirt from their previous impacts and it was like an explosion of dirt and debris. It blew out over 50 feet into the air and covered 100 or so feet as it fell and pelted the ground. Izuku stood over the prone form of Tanya and she didn't move. After a 10 count, Present Mike spoke. Knockout. He yelled. Winner. Izuku Midoriya. The entire crowd had been too shocked by what they had just witnessed to react right away. It took nearly 10 seconds before the first cheer started. After that, sound seemed to explode from the crowd and it filled the stadium. Shouts, cheers, and hollers of appreciation echoed as Izuku dropped to his knees and picked up Tanya. I told you, you would tear me apart, if I tried attacking that way. Tanya whispered. SHH. Rest. Izuku said and gave her a quick kiss. The medics are coming. You, too. Tanya breathed. I'll collapse from exhaustion as soon as they check you out and say you're fine. Izuku said and she barked a laugh. Put some pants on, you exhibitionist. Tanya said as the medics arrived. They are bicycle shorts, thank you. Izuku said and picked her up to put her onto the stretcher the medics had. You need to be checked, too. One of the medics said. You are going to have some nasty bruises. Her first. Izuku said and the medics checked her over as Recovery Girl came out. I can't touch either of you right now. Recovery Girl said. Maybe tomorrow after you both rest. You use stamina to get us to heal faster and neither of us has much left. Izuku said and she nodded. Miss Degraff is going to be fine. One of the medics said as the others rubbed salve over the many developing bruises Tanya had. Now I'll check you and. Okay. Izuku said and dropped to his knees, then he fell backwards onto the dirt, unconscious. He had a lot less stamina left than I thought. Recovery Girl said with a shake of her head. Let's get them both into the medical bay to let them rest. They brought over another stretcher and put Izuku onto it, then carried both teenagers out of the arena with the crowd's enthusiastic cheers following them. Chapter 25. Izuku woke up about 20 minutes after collapsing in the arena. Hey, sleepyhead. You're finally awake. Tanya said from the bed next to him. I feel like crap. Izuku said and tried to sit up, let out a groan, and laid back down. By the way, don't move. Tanya said with a laugh. You couldn't tell me that before I tried. Izuku asked. No. You wouldn't learn not to. Tanya said. Izuku laughed a little. Ugh, even laughing hurts. Well, you are nearly completely covered in Tanya administered fist-sized bruises. Tanya joked. Izuku laughed. You're not much better. I can take more punishment than you any day, you wuss. Tanya said with a manic grin, then they both laughed. I'm glad to see you're both feeling better. Recovery Girl said. You mean relatively, right? Izuku asked and the old woman laughed. You both have quick recovering abilities. I won't bother using my full quirk on you. Recovery Girl said and kissed Tanya's hand, then walked over to Izuku and kissed his hand as well. That should take care of your aches and pains for a few hours. When you got to sleep tonight, use the bruise ointment. Thank you. Izuku said and sat up without groaning. I think we can make it to the award ceremony without falling asleep. Tanya nodded and sat up as well. We need to find you a replacement tracksuit first. You are not going out there dressed like that. They've already seen it. Izuku said with a grin and Tanya smacked his arm. I have a suit for you. All Might said as he entered the room. Hey, All Might. Izuku said and took the tracksuit. Thanks. You were very impressive out there today. All Might said, proudly. It was Tanya's idea to show off all of our hard work. Izuku said and finished getting dressed. I think you both have garnered a lot of attention. All Might said and looked at Tanya. Especially Miss Degraff. Only because everyone assumed I could only fly and use toy guns, even though Izuku has been telling them differently since the start of the school year. Tanya said and stood up. All Might nodded. Yes, we have all underestimated you. You have no idea. Izuku said with a knowing smile and took Tanya's hand. Shall we? We shall. Tanya said and walked out of the room. They were soon outside and the crowd started cheering as they appeared on all of the jumbo screens around the arena. They walked over to the stage with All Might behind them and saw Todoroki on the second place spot with Bakugo on the third place spot. Izuku and Tanya exchanged looks and then looked at All Might. Don't worry. He whispered and waved at the stairs behind the first place podium. Wait, both of us? Izuku asked, surprised. Shut up and don't question it. Tanya whispered and he nodded. The both of them went up the short stairs and Izuku let her hand go to put an arm around her waist before he waved to the crowd. They all cheered and hollered, so Tanya did the same thing and hugged Izuku with an arm and waved. The crowd cheered even louder. That's right, everyone. All Might said into a microphone and pointed to the both of them. Congratulations to the winners of this year's UA Sports Festival, Izuku Midoriya and Tanya Degraf. The crowd roared and applauded loudly. In second place is Shoto Todoroki. All Might said and the cheers were lessened. Third place is Katsuki Bakugo. The cheers died even further. Would you like to hear from the champions? All Might asked and the crowd cheered loudly. He walked over to the podium and handed Izuku the microphone. Have at it, young Midoriya. Izuku gave Tanya a look and she nodded. He took a deep breath and put the microphone by his mouth. I want to thank my partner in all things for her help in making me what I am today. There were a lot of ah sounds from the crowd. As you saw, she can kick my ass if I don't listen to her. That made a lot of people laugh. It's been a trying time the last while, ever since I developed my quirk. Izuku said. It took meeting a special someone before I manifested for the first time and I can never thank them enough for what they've done for me. The crowd cheered and All Might successfully hid his proud smile behind his normal beaming one. Now that I have made a fool of myself, you can listen to my better half. Izuku said and gave Tanya the microphone. Tanya whacked the back of his head and everyone heard the ow Izuku let out, which made everyone laugh again. If you don't already know, I was a quirk birth. The gasps across the entire stadium echoed around the entire place. I had it great for the first 10 years of my life, until the hero massacre and the masked villain killed my mother and his henchmen killed my father. Tanya said. The entire crowd was completely silent. I was only 10 at the time and reacted in anger. I did something that the government deemed bad, namely killing my father's murderer and trying to kill the masked villain. They tossed me aside because of that and pulled my automatic recommendation to UA and gave my scholarship away. A collective no came from them, which kind of surprised Tanya, so she went with it. They also kicked me out of the military academy that I was the top student of and cut off my family's government funding, leaving me all alone with no family, my parents to bury, and my life completely wrecked. There were a lot of crying people in the audience now. Don't worry, they'll pay for what they did. Tanya said and saw a lot of people nodding. It took some hard work after that, and things kind of worked out. She could almost feel everyone's attention on her. I started my delivery service and eventually found a great woman to take over being my guardian. I love you. A lone woman's voice shouted from the visitors' stands and a few people laughed. Thanks, Miss Jusina, Tanya said and waved to her. I also started in a normal middle school and met a very special someone. He was shy, bullied, and was so afraid to talk that he always mumbled. Deku. Bakugo shouted and a few people booed him. He's gotten better, thanks to therapy. Tanya said. Which one? Someone shouted. Both of them. Tanya said and more people laughed. Anyways, I started making money and my life changed again. Is it for the better? I don't know. If I still had my parents, I might not have met Izuku until UA, or at all. Things could have been so different, and now they are different in another way. Izuku and I have been through a lot together. After Izuku and I cleaned up Dagaba Beach. Thank you. A bunch of people said at the same time. We kept training and working hard to get into UA. I was always motivated to do well and I found someone else who was as well. I knew we could kick ass and get into our chosen hero academy, then we did. Tanya said and a lot of people cheered. Our knowledge and experience grows every day and we dealt with the USJ incident like pro heroes that are twice our age. She said with pride. Now look at where we are. First place in the sports festival. Yet. The crowd cheered. Where will we be tomorrow? Next month. Tanya asked and let them think about it. We're going to keep getting better, more powerful, and no one is going to stop us from showing the world what we can do. She looked up slightly into the sky. No. 1. The crowd cheered and Tanya handed the microphone back to All Might. He looked stunned and she refrained from giving him a manic grin, because she knew what he was thinking. She had admitted to killing people, on live television, and no one was disgusted by it. Some even cheered for her. Tanya and Izuku waved at the crowd and they cheered and cheered. Asterisk. That night, the government agent that had previously handled Tanya's case, Anyuni, stared at the television at the replay of Tanya Degraf's little speech. He had known it was a mistake to get rid of her after her casual threats to himself and the people he worked for. Her also admitting that they had pissed off someone that had no problem killing them for it, made him shiver then, and he shivered again right now. His cell phone rang and he checked the ID before he answered it. I thought I made it clear to never call me. Yes, and I normally wouldn't. The man's stern voice responded. I need you to. I've been retired for 5 years. Anyuni said. No one retires from our job. I did. Very specifically. Anyuni said. I'm not even allowed inside the national bank that's government run after what I did. The stern man's voice sighed. You have to get her under control. Anyuni barked a laugh. She could have been. Anyuni. She literally told me she would have been our best operative if we hadn't cut her loose. It's my fault that I didn't realize that until long after I left the hospital. Anyuni said. If you just watched what I did, you saw her physically tear apart an entire stadium of concrete and fight, hand to hand, with a kid that could put All Might to shame in a few years. The stern man let out a low hum. I warned you that if you tried to interfere with her at all, she would come for you. There's no way she would know who I am or who worked for us. The stern man responded. An Uni laughed. Are you kidding me right now? What do you mean? Everyone in the office that doesn't know her secret, uses her delivery service. No, they wouldn't be that irresponsible too. Especially your personal secretary. An Uni interrupted. How else do you think your deliveries get where they are going overnight? She uses the guaranteed delivery in 20 minutes or its free service at least once a week. How do you know that? The stern man asked, clearly angry. I'm retired, not stupid. I needed to keep an eye on how Tanya would find us all. An Uni said. Unfortunately, the company sent me my retirement and severance package by express delivery. She's actually getting pretty tall now that she's 15. We need to immediately change our shipping policies. She can't track us if she already has our home addresses, safe house locations, and fake storefronts in businesses. An Uni informed him and the stern man cursed for several minutes. I told you, the office staff has been using her for deliveries for years. She has all of our addresses and can find any of us. Then I'm retiring and moving. The stern man said. An Uni laughed. Good luck telling your superiors that you're afraid of a little girl coming after you for what she admitted happening to her on national television. She still can't use normal guns until she gets a firearm license, which we've blocked. Tanya Degraff can never own a firearm. The stern man said with satisfaction. You are an idiot. An Uni said and the man cursed at him. Who told you that she would register the license, or the guns for that matter, under her own name? She can't carry a firearm registered to someone else. Ha! Have you even looked at the permits? An Uni asked. Carry permits don't have picture ID, neither do the licenses and firearm registrations. It's too expensive to implement because of all the police and guard personnel that would need them and also for the government to keep track of. As long as it comes back valid, she can do whatever she wants when she's of age and has a hero license. The stern man was quiet for a minute. Then I'll start to. Shut up. An Uni yelled into the phone and cut the stern man off. Do you want to create a worse villain than All for One? What do you mean? The stern man asked. It's bad enough she's going to kill us all for what we did to her, and the public seems perfectly happy with that, by the way. If you stop her hero license approval, she won't bother waiting until she is of age to get her firearms. She can't legally. She won't be doing anything legally, you idiot. An Uni shouted. Stop your whining and accept that you screwed up. I have. The stern man didn't say anything. She's coming for us and it's our own fault. If you do anything else to her, like you tried to do to her toy guns by blocking them at customs, she won't even bother doing it close and personal. She can use a long-range rifle and scope to take you out from anywhere and you will never know when it happens until you're dead. You've made your point. The stern man said. I hope so, because I don't want to die before she graduates. I've got 2.5 long years left to enjoy things and I'm going to. Don't you dare screw this up for me. You made me lose the rest of my life already. Don't take my last 2 years, too. The stern man sighed. You blame me. Of course I do. It's your fault. An Uni said and the stern man sighed again. It's your job to assess clients and their potential after we bring them to you, and all you saw was a little girl that we could get rid of because the press might have given her a bad reputation for what she did. You didn't disagree with me. No, I didn't. None of us did. We all assumed you knew what was best and we followed your lead. Like I said at the time, I didn't realize it until I was already back at headquarters and it hit me that we could have had the world's best operative and undercover agent long before she was legally allowed to be. The stern man was quiet for a while. What if we lifted her government restrictions? She can't make her deliveries if she's not allowed to fly. Are you even listening to yourself? An Uni asked, disbelief in his voice. She will kill you if you interfere. What part of that don't you understand? I can't let her kill us all when she feels like it. The stern man spat. You can't stop her. An Uni said. You literally can't. All you can do is piss her off and make her kill you faster. If she's going to kill me anyway, I'm going to make sure that she will never. Kaboom. The phone went dead and An Uni looked at the dropped call message. I probably should have told you that she didn't need to wait for a real rifle to kill you. He chuckled and turned off the cell phone. Goodbye, old boss. Asterisk. To kill you. The voice said and chuckled. Goodbye, old boss. His boss really was an idiot. Izuku said as he looked through the old army viewfinder at the results of the shot. That was one of their nicer safe houses. Tanya laughed softly as she quickly disassembled her heavily modified sniper air rifle. She had 10 replacement barrels for it and she handed the one she just used to Izuku. He took it and twisted it, then bent it in half again. Thanks. Tanya said and took it back, made it glow, and then threw it at the ground. After a solid thump, the crushed metal was long gone and she kicked the dirt over the hole it made before stepped on it to pat it down, then swiped her shoe over it to get rid of the evidence. How many more? Izuku asked. Only 3. They are working under previous orders from their boss and they're trying to decide how best to deal with me. Izuku frowned. Are they together? Tanya smiled. They're meeting at one of their fake businesses that they use as a spy hideout. Izuku lost the frown and smiled instead. Are we raiding it? Tanya laughed and pointed to her back for Izuku to hook back up. Momo gave me the EMP prototype you thought up. It actually worked. Izuku asked, surprised. Her mother was over the moon when Momo showed her your designs, so you better expect a huge check tomorrow. Izuku shook his head for a moment and then laughed. As long as they don't put my name on it. Tanya reached back and pat his thigh. They know that and are buying the idea to sell the devices to the military. Okay, I'm secure. Let's go. Izuku said and Tanya swirled the air around them, then took off. They were both dressed in solid black and no one saw or heard them, because she kept them just below the speed of sound as they went to the next location to scout out the best way to assault the place and to take care of the people conspiring to hurt Tanya. Are you sure you're okay with this? Tanya asked and then felt a pair of lips on the back of her neck. We're removing villains that are trying to stop you from becoming a hero, and all because of their own fears and mistakes. Izuku said. I'm not really okay with killing every villain we meet, but, the dangerous ones? The ones that can't be redeemed or even show any remorse or try to change. He chuckled. Those I have no problem with getting rid of. Especially if they are after me, right? Tanya asked as they gently landed in a great area that overlooked the building they needed to enter. No one is allowed to hurt you anymore. Izuku said and hugged her from behind. They did enough to you already. I won't let them do any more, even if it costs them their lives. Tanya pat his hands and he let her go. At least Anyuni came to his senses and left them behind. Izuku helped her strip off the carry harness and her extra packs, then added his own to the pile and then camouflaged it. We're down to pistols and knives. Tanya smiled. It's okay. We're going to kick everyone's ass. Izuku chuckled and they snuck down the hill towards the street. It was late at night and no one was around, so Tanya used one of her normal pistols to shoot out two of the streetlights. Their passage across the dimly lit street after that wasn't seen by anyone or any cameras. Tanya made the stop gesture and Izuku froze. She made the double motion forward gesture and pointed at the door, then held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. Izuku jumped up and lunged just as the door opened and 2 men were coming out. He barreled into them and sent them back inside the building as Tanya tossed in the miniature EMP. The thing went off and everything electric in a 100-foot radius was knocked out and shut off. Izuku and Tanya entered the building with manic grins on their faces, which terrified the 3 people on the floor. The 2 men had fallen on the woman and they tried to go for their guns. It was much too late for that to work and Izuku pulled the guns and the backup weapons from the men's belts. He also broke their wrists to stop them from interfering. You are going to tell me all your company's plans for me? Tanya said and reached down to grab the woman by her collar. No. Let me go. The woman screeched. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a salesgirl and Tanya lifted her up as if she weighed nothing and shook her. Lie to me again, Agent Lisbon, and your cute little niece will be the next person I visit. The woman's face paled. And no, you monster. Leave my niece alone. That's entirely up to you. Tanya said and carried the woman into another room that the agents used for interrogations. Izuku, if you would. Izuku grabbed the 2 men by their shirts and carried them inside as well. Tanya had been teaching him a lot more than just fighting techniques and tactics for the last 5 years. Much more. The door was shut and no one but them heard what happened after that. Chapter 26. Up. Inko shouted through Izuku's door the next morning. You're going to miss the train. Ugh. Izuku said and then sighed. I'm paying for an express delivery to the school. Me. Breakfast. Inko said instead, which made Tanya laugh. We'll be right there. Tanya said and sat up. We only just got back. Izuku said and looked at her. How can you look perfect after only an hour's sleep? You learn to sleep wherever and whenever you can at the front. Tanya said and stood. If we hadn't showered before going to bed, we could have gotten another hour. I'll sleep in class. Izuku said and stared at her ass as she got dressed. Is it any better looking in just panties? Tanya asked without looking at him, knowing full well what he was looking at, and pulled on her pants to button them before slipping on her shirt. Yes and no. Izuku said and she whipped her head around to glare at him. What? Did you say? Tanya asked and her hand made a fist, her shirt hanging open. It doesn't matter what you wear to cover it. It's spectacular and I always enjoy it, even when you are wearing those loose sweatpants. Izuku said with a grin, which made Tanya growl. It's not nice to tease me first thing in the morning. Tanya said and lost the angry look. Or at all. Izuku chuckled and stood up to give her a hug. I'm sorry if you thought I meant something bad. You made it sound like something bad, you jerk. Tanya said and glared at him. Get dressed. Izuku nodded and put on the school's uniform and they went out to eat breakfast. I'm so proud of the both of you. Inko gushed as they sat down at the kitchen table. The news can't get enough of you. Izuku blushed from the praise and Tanya nodded. I knew you were both taking All Might's training seriously. Inko said and gazed at them with admiration. You're both going to be great heroes. Izuku and Tanya exchanged looks. After the things they had found out last night and the documents and equipment they acquired from the fake business, they had quite a bit of work to do to stop the background plans that the government agency had in place to stop Tanya from becoming a hero. Some were triggered when certain events happened and others were started by specific people and their commands. They had already removed one danger, only to find out there was a whole council above that man to monitor and potentially remove as well as a lot of specifically placed underlings. Luckily, they had gained the protocols and the frequencies for their contacts and would only need a few well-placed express deliveries to confirm the details. When they did, they would be able to deal with them when it was necessary. They finished eating and Izuku kissed his mother's cheek to make her blush, then he and Tanya left at a fast march to get to the train station. The ride seemed to pass by quickly and they both ignored the extra attention from the crowds and whispers about them. I didn't think going to school would become a retreat from attention. Izuku whispered to Tanya, and she nodded. We've stepped out onto the stage and now we have to give them the show they want. Tanya warned. Don't worry, I'm ready. Izuku said. I hope so, because it's not going to get any easier from here on out. Izuku took her hand and held it. No matter what happens, we're going to crush any opposition. Tanya let a manic grin spread across her face as she looked into his eyes. You're stroking my ego, you know. Izuku grinned back. That's not all I want to stroke. Tanya barked a laugh. You didn't grab it enough this morning. Sleep groping doesn't count. I only used one hand, too. Izuku claimed and she shook her head. I knew I shouldn't have let you touch it that first time. Tanya said and let the manic grin fade. Who gave me the ultimatum to never touch another? Izuku asked. Even Millie's tail is blocked from my roaming hands. Tanya snorted a laugh. The meet and greet hour after the sports festival was not the time to ask her something like that, you dunce. Izuku chuckled. I couldn't tell if she blushed or not. You ruffled her head feathers, so technically she was blushing. Tanya said and remembered the surprised look on Millie's velociraptor face at Izuku's request to pet her tail. You're lucky she's a nice girl or she would have tried to bite you. Izuku shrugged. We've been too busy to hang out with her because of all the training we did for the sports festival. You could have at least whispered it to her. Tanya said with a smile. What for? I don't mind people knowing that I'm not discriminating against anthropomorphs. Tanya laughed. You're confusing discrimination with inappropriate sexual comments. Izuku grinned and winked at her as the train came to a stop. They walked down the street and went to the UA Hero Academy's main building. Hey, guys. Mina gushed as she practically hopped over to them by the front doors. When she was close enough, she looked around to see that no one was looking at them and then gave Izuku a hug. Hey, Mina. Izuku said and hugged her back. Thanks for what you said to Momo. Mina whispered and took a step away. I just told Momo the truth. Izuku said and reached out to lightly touch the girl's cheek. You're sexy enough without needing to make guys stare at you for the wrong reasons. Mina's pink skin flushed to a darker pink. You're a really nice guy, Izuku. You're not going to change your costume, are you? Tanya asked. Nope. Mina said and then smiled. Not every guy is as accepting as Izuku is with physical quirks, so I still need to beat my sexy body into their brains the hard way. Through their eyes. Izuku barked a laugh and shook his head, then opened one of the doors for them to go through. Thanks. Mina said and darted through. Tanya followed her and Izuku went next. They went to their classroom and it was nearly packed with almost everyone there. Momo saw them and rummaged through her bag to pull out an envelope. She walked over to them and held it out to Izuku. Mom said this is well worth the investment. Izuku took the envelope and debated opening it. You can save it for later. Tanya said and then smiled. If you open it here, you know you're going to shock everyone when you curse at the amount. Izuku tossed the internal debate aside and took Tanya's advice. He tucked it into his pocket and nodded. Momo looked on the verge of laughing and Mina was grinning. Now I want to hear him curse. Mina said, happily. Izuku shook his head and they sat down to talk about what they would be doing today. He sat at his desk, Tanya sat beside him, Momo leaned against Tanya's desk and Mina sat on top of Izuku's. The hero agency offers are going to be rolling in for you too. Mina said. You guys destroyed everyone else. Did they ever? Eureka exclaimed as she walked over to them. Morning. Morning. They all said in greeting back and she leaned against the desk beside Izuku. I was glad you took us along for the ride in the second task. Toru, the invisible girl said as she walked over to sit on Tanya's desk. It made it a bit boring for the spectators, but, we had a blast. Eureka held a hand up and Toru gave her a high five across Mina's lap. It totally was. I'm sure a few of you will get some offers. Izuku said. The fights Tanya and I did weren't the only ones in the tournament. No one remembers any of the others, Deku. Bakugo groused and crossed his arms. Says the guy that made it to the second last fight in his division. Izuku countered. Todoroki huffed and looked away. He had been the first fight in Izuku's division and had lost nearly instantly. I said I was sorry. Izuku said to him. After a few moments, Todoroki nodded slightly. I could have beaten that vine-haired wench, too. Bakugo said and glanced at Tanya. If you attacked quickly enough, yes. If you let her get her rotating and regenerating vine shield up, she might have won, just for being unable for you to get to. Tanya said. Oh. That reminds me. Izuku said and reached into his backpack. He pulled out several pieces of paper and handed it over to Bakugo. We've been discussing your quirk and think we came up with something. What's this? Bakugo asked. A modification to your grenade gauntlets. Tanya said. Izuku's already submitted the design to UA's support company for you. If you want it added to your hero costume, they'll send over the updated equipment for this afternoon's hero class. Bakugo read over the sheets and looked at the new design and the cross-section to show the different modification for him to both use the larger explosion and also more compressed multiple explosions. You already figured out my howitzer move? Bakugo asked, disbelief in his voice. Tanya nodded and Izuku smiled. We might have ignored a lot of your teasing and bullying, but, that doesn't mean we never listened to what you were saying. Izuku said and Bakugo wouldn't look up. It's all right, Kaken. We know you've worked hard to get past it all. Bakugo grumbled that he didn't need his help as he folded up the papers and then took out his cell phone and sent a text to the support company. Tanya smirked and lightly touched Izuku's arm briefly and saw his nod. All right, settle down. Aizawa said and everyone scrambled to sit in their seats. 3 seconds. Not bad. He said, almost in praise, and the students all gave him smiles. Don't let it go to your heads. That made a lot of them laugh under their breath and a few exchanged amused looks. Thanks to the great showing at the sports festival, the school has been flooded with offers for a bunch of you. Aizawa said and didn't look at Tanya or Izuku. If you want the breakdown, go on the school's website and log into your student account. Tanya nodded at Izuku and he took out the little hologram that he received his acceptance letter in and hit a button on his phone. The hologram opened up and instead of showing the exam test results, it showed the school list for offers and it hovered above his desk. Tanya had 6,876 inquiries, Izuku had almost as much with 6,652, then Todoroki had 4,901 and Bakugo had 3,045. Eureka had 1,103 and Toru had 898. The numbers plummeted after that with the last student in the class with 135 inquiries. Hey. Well, there's no point in me saying to work harder. Aizawa said and a few of them laughed openly this time. Go over your options for the rest of the class and see where you want to go. If you have any questions, ask Izuku. That made most of the class laugh, including Izuku, and then Aizawa zipped up his sleeping bag and laid down. Do you want to do it or should I? Izuku asked. He might like that it's you. Or kill you. It's a toss-up. Tanya said with a smirk. Izuku chuckled and pulled out a small case from his pocket as he walked over to the front of the classroom. He knelt beside the sleeping bag and he could see a pair of eyes glare at him. What do you want? Aizawa asked. I just wanted to give you these. Izuku said and handed him the little case. What is it? Aizawa asked without opening the sleeping bag to take the case. Tanya and I commissioned a little-known support company for these. Izuku said and opened the case to reveal what looked like contact lenses. They are larger than normal and prevent things like dirt entering the eye and letting them dry out. Aizawa blinked his eyes several times before he slowly unzipped the sleeping bag to sit up. They have a permanent gel layer that covers the eye. It's for long-distance military snipers that aren't allowed to blink for minutes at a time as they take aim and their spotters call the coordinates for their targets. Izuku said and then he smiled. We've got an order into the UA support company for a visor update for you as well. When you hit the release button, the visor holds your eyelids open until you hit the button again. Aizawa held a hand out for the small case. Why? Well, we figured after how hard you worked at the USJ, your old visor just wasn't cutting it. Izuku said. It took this long for the company to work out the correct chemical formulas to get the gel to form a liquid seal on your eye. You never have to worry about your eyes drying out anymore. Aizawa examined them and had to admit that they would be a great asset for his quirk. What's the downside? Izuku grinned. You can only wear them while you're awake. You can't sleep with them in. If you do, the gel has a tendency to spread out and will glue your eyelids shut. Aizawa barked a laugh. Okay, that makes these things more believable. We thought you would see it that way. Izuku said and stood up. Enjoy your nap, sir. Aizawa closed the case and laid back down as he disappeared into his sleeping bag. Izuku went back to his desk and most of the students had their cell phones out and were going over the hero agencies and their offers. He sat down and took out his own phone and turned his chair to face Tanya's desk. She had already done the same and they started to compare their agency offers with their foreheads pressed together. They wanted a good agency and wanted to go there together, since they had made their national debut as a couple and wanted to keep that image. If they couldn't get into the same agency, they would have to think about applying independently of their offers. It would rub some people the wrong way, since they would be rejecting the majority of the interest in them. It couldn't be helped, though. For them, it was doing it together or not at all. Chapter 27. After searching through the majority of their offers for most of the class, Tanya and Izuku narrowed it down to 3 agencies. One was a small independent one that was run by the rabbit hero, Mirko. She didn't have anyone else working there, except for an assistant, and she had a huge area to patrol. It would fit right into Tanya's high scouting position and Izuku would fit right in with Mirko's speed. The second one was a very popular agency in the capital city and had about 50 heroes working for them. It had a high profile on social media and even had their own media crew for coverage to sell to the television news stations. It would be great to increase their popularity and exposure to the world. The third one was a medium-level agency with 10 heroes on the payroll and their patrol area was right in the middle of a city that was near a potential high-crime area. They had a lot of gangs and yakuza activity there, which made it a very tempting target for both Tanya and Izuku to hone their skills. Unfortunately, it would reduce Tanya's long-range attacks to medium and short, which meant that she would be limited to pistols and only an occasional shot with one of her modified rifles. How did you get yours pared down so quickly? Eureka asked, a little exasperated. I'm still reading the headers for the offers. Izuku chuckled. I'd like to say it's a trade secret and we can never reveal it. Eureka almost vibrated as she waited to hear what it was. We chose the areas we want to patrol and picked through only the agencies near them. Izuku said and Eureka's mouth dropped open. Yes, really. We know we can make a difference wherever we go, so we picked areas with the most exposure and the highest crime rates. But, what about, Eureka stopped talking and thought about it. Hold on, I think you're onto something. Rather than trying to prune down hundreds of offers, I should pick the job I see myself doing and where it would be. With those limits in place, the number of agencies nearby or available drop significantly. You got it. Izuku said and glanced over at Bakugo. Kaken, if I can make a suggestion. You're going to anyway, so go ahead. Bakugo said and crossed his arms. Izuku grinned. Go with Todoroki to Endeavor's hero agency. That made both boys turn their heads to stare at him with shock on their faces. Endeavor's the number 2 hero, Izuku started to say. And he's an asshole. Tanya added with a grin. Izuku chuckled. Yes, and he's also got a handle on his temper and knows his stuff. He couldn't become the number 2 hero if he didn't. The both of you have specific reasons to choose his agency. Todoroki because it's his father and knows how to harness excessive power properly, and Kaken because he can learn how to harness his confrontational personality to actually help him become a hero. Todoroki sat back and he couldn't help but agree with Izuku's observations, despite not wanting to. He hated his father and didn't want to spend extra time with him, but he really did know everything about being a hero. Bakugo clamped his mouth shut on the insult trying to come out and tried to not scowl about it. He sat back and considered Izuku's words, despite not wanting to. Izuku never lied, so Bakugo knew that if there was anyone that could help him adjust his penchant for shouts and berating people, it would be Endeavor. Tanya gave Izuku a nod just as the bell rang. We have 5 minutes to find a quiet place and come back for the next class. Izuku nodded and they left the room at a fast walk. Mina, Yurika, Momo, Toru, Tsuyu, and Jiro exchanged looks, then ran out of the room to follow them. They knew what was going to happen and wanted to be there. 2 minutes later, they knelt in front of an empty classroom and listened at the door. This amount of money is ridiculous. Izuku nearly shouted. Is Momo's mother fucking insane? I can't believe that. The girls crouched outside the classroom slapped their hands over their mouths and laughed at hearing the nice, quiet, and unassuming Izuku as he cursed like a sailor. Even Momo was having a hard time trying to keep her composure. Are you done? Tanya asked when her friend finally finished his rant. You are taking that money and you are going to give your mother a vacation while we are at the summer training camp. Izuku laughed. Mom will never go without us. Are you sure? Tanya asked. You've been at my house enough to know my mom won't go anywhere and leave me home alone when she can be there in case I need her. The girls listening in let out muffled ah sounds. Tanya sighed. All right. The camp isn't for the whole summer. We can take the money and the 3 of us can go. Really? Izuku asked. I think there's a nice resort near MT Fuji that has an outdoor hot springs bath or something. Tanya said. I made a delivery there once. It's a nice place. Then that's what we'll do. Izuku said. The girls heard what they thought was a kissing sound, which meant they had to get out of there fast. They scrambled around and ran for it to get back to class. They're gone. Izuku said. Do you think Momo will take the hint? About arranging for us to stay at her family's resort? Probably. Tanya said and took his hand as she led him from the room. How much do you want to bet that some of the girls will show up as well? That's a sucker bet. You know they're going to beg to come along when Momo tells them it's her family's place. We can mention our trip in class if you want. Tanya said with a knowing smile. Izuku laughed. I didn't even bet and you're already wrecking the odds. Tanya gave him a brief manic grin, because one of their difficult-to-find targets was going to vacation at the resort. Did you expect anything less from me? Izuku shook his head and they walked in silence back to class and went inside. True to her word, during geography class, Tanya mentioned MT Fuji and the plans to go there after the summer training camp. That set off the girls and even some of the boys because of the idea. Of course, Momo mentioned that her family owned it and that made them all talk even more intensely about it, with the whole class eventually agreeing to go and meet there. Tanya gave Izuku a smirk and he chuckled at her completely destroying the odds of the bet that he was too smart to take anyway. Asterisk. A few days later, an incident in Hosa City caused a huge stir in the hero community and Principal Nizu himself came to Class 1A to talk to Ida Tanya. His brother, the pro-hero known as Ingenium, was in a confrontation with a supposedly new villain named Stain. One of his legs was damaged and he barely got away, but his pro-hero career would be over. Unable to run like he used to, he retired and would need months of physical therapy to try and get the normal use of his leg back. Ida was devastated. His famous brother, someone he looked up to and was inspired to be like, had been forced to no longer be the hero he was meant to be. Izuku stood and walked over to him to put a hand on his friend's shoulder. Ida, we're here for you. Ida looked up from his desk into Izuku's eyes. Izuku, my brother, he's why I'm here. Izuku smiled. Then don't disappoint him. Take an internship at his agency and let the people know that the Tanya family see the safety of the people as a personal task that they will strive to meet, no matter what. Ida made his hands into fists and then he smiled. You're right. Tanyas don't give up. My brother might not be a pro-hero anymore, but he has always been and will always be my hero. Make sure you tell him that. Izuku said and nodded to Nizu. Sir, I assume Ida has a few days off. He does. Nizu, the mouse-like being said with a nod. I even have a car ready to take him right to the hospital. Ida shot to his feet. Thank you, sir. He said and bowed deeply, then turned to Izuku and bowed as well. Thank you both. Gather your things and I'll walk you out. Nizu said and Ida quickly did so and left the classroom. Izuku walked back to his seat and Tanya was already leaning over to whisper. Good work getting him out of the revenge mindset. Tanya breathed. We'll need to do some research on this hero killer villain. Izuku couldn't stop the manic grin from appearing on his face briefly. More evil for us to clean up. I think we just found out where we're taking our own internships. The third option. Tanya whispered and lightly touched his cheek before she leaned back to sit properly at her desk. Izuku nodded and didn't say anything else as the class resumed. The students had to pick their hero names and both Tanya and Izuku had chosen them a long time ago. Asterisk. I promise, Tensei. I won't go hunting for the hero killer. Ida said at his brother's bedside in the hospital. Tensei sighed in relief. Thank you, Ida. I know you want to find him and bring him to justice, but, you're barely halfway through your first term at school. You've been involved in a couple of things, yes. Are you ready for a pro-hero's duty? Not yet. He smiled and held a hand out. I'm confident that you will be, with more experience. You're a Tanya, after all. Ida took the offered hand and nodded. Tanyas don't give up. Tensei nodded back and let his brother's hand go. You actually called me your personal hero. He chuckled. I didn't know I had such a fanboy in my own brother. Ida laughed as well. He knew telling his older brother would raise his spirits. You better use it to get better as quickly as you can. My admiration can't wait that long, you know. Both of them laughed for several minutes. Their parents stood just outside the room and had listened to everything. They were very proud of their two boys and knew that the both of them were heroes in their own rights. Asterisk. 2 days later, a woman's voice yelled through the pro-hero agency and she started to run through the place. They both accepted. They accepted. She shouted and then talked constantly as she told each of the 10 heroes and several of the interns that they were getting the winners of the UA Sports Festival for their 2-week internships. Everyone was excited about that, especially the agency's founder, Mr. Brave. His assigned area for hero work was rife with gang activity and Yakuza members getting away unpunished. Having 2 warm bodies to pad out his patrol schedule was a welcome development. What are their hero names? Mr. Brave asked. Colonel Degrove, the Eternal Soldier, and Captain Midoriya, the Superhero Soldier. Mr. Brave half frowned and half smiled, which looked odd on his face. What is it, sir? They are claiming to be soldiers. Mr. Brave said. He wasn't sure why that kind of unnerved him. Maybe they are just really disciplined. She offered and her boss nodded. Perhaps. Mr. Brave said and looked down at his desk and the papers there. Give me a hand integrating them into the patrol schedules for their time here. Yes, sir. His assistant said and sat down to work out the best way to utilize the 2 powerful teens. Asterisk. The time passed quickly as the students prepared to go to their hero agency internships. They had all chosen what they thought was the best options for them and packed their suitcases and hero costumes. Tanya had a slightly bigger case because of her rifle and she strapped it to her back to keep her hands free. She debated offering to deliver everyone's things to their hero agencies and decided not to. So, this is it. Eureka said as they all gathered at the main train station. They were each going to different cities for the next 2 weeks and most had different trains to board. We still have our cell phones. Toru, the invisible girl said. We can text each other whenever we want. Yeah, but, Eureka looked at Izuku and Tanya. It's not going to be the same not seeing you guys every day. Ribbit. Tsuyu said, almost as a laugh. It's only for 2 weeks. I'm still going to miss you all. Eureka said. Group hug, girls. Mina said and pulled everyone nearby over and tried to give them all a hug at the same time. Izuku had somehow ended up in the middle of the hug and was now surrounded. He didn't fight or struggle, because he knew they wouldn't like it if he did or complained that he was getting a group hug from them. He felt someone's hand on his butt and he quickly grabbed their wrist to stop them. He looked down and saw the wrist was attached to Tanya's hand and let it go. Good boy. Tanya whispered in praise and Izuku blushed. The girls all let go at the same time and saw Izuku's red face. I knew that would work. Mina said proudly, which made the other girls giggle and laugh softly. A train pulled into the spot behind them and it was the right destination for Tanya, Izuku, Todoroki, and Bakugo. Both Endeavor's and Mr. Brave's agencies had premises in Hosa City. That's us. Izuku said and picked up his suitcase. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. Bye, guys. Eureka said and waved. Mina put an arm over her shoulders and waved, too. Have fun. Momo said and then she smiled wickedly. If you have any more ideas my mother likes. Izuku sighed at his remembered reaction to the last check he received and Tanya laughed. Come on, you. Tanya said and took his hand to bring him onto the train. Bakugo and Todoroki were right behind them and sat at a respectful distance away. Izuku and Tanya sat down and waved at the remains of their class as the train closed up and pulled out of the station. It was going to be a bit of a long ride and Tanya relaxed into Izuku's side. Do you have any other ideas? Tanya asked, teasingly. Izuku smiled and took out a folded piece of paper. I don't know how effective it will be as a military asset, though. Tanya opened the paper and read what it said. You made a concussion grenade. You gave me the idea during the sports festival when you fought that girl with vines for hair. Izuku said. It uses successive explosive waves of force to create a stun effect and it's practically without shrapnel. I think they can tinker with it and make the casing fold back or something and remove the physical danger completely. Tanya looked it over and she wasn't surprised that it was similar to some of the prototypes she had seen on her old world. This world was a comparison of contrasts. They had robots and not ace. They had some high-technology devices and yet they weren't widely used or available. The normal population seemed to be at a certain level and no one was trying to change that. People who innovated for the entire populace were few and far between, with most inventors wanting to make things specifically for heroes and specialized in that, instead of making everyone's lives a little easier or raising their standard of living. When do you want me to send it to Momo? Tanya asked as she used her cell phone to take a picture. Before her train leaves, so she knows I had something when she teased me about it. Izuku grinned. Tanya laughed softly and sent the picture. Do you want to bet on? Her phone buzzed and she shook her head. I didn't even get to say the conditions. She looked at the text and chuckled. She's pissed that you let her tease you. Of course she is. Izuku said and rolled his eyes. Tell her I liked the look on her face when she did it and I didn't want to ruin the moment. Tanya quickly sent the text and there was nothing for several moments. Now we can bet on how long. Her phone buzzed again and she huffed. Damn it. Izuku laughed and looked at her phone. No, I'm the one that's lucky I already have you. Do you? Tanya asked with a smirk. I'm your partner in all things. Izuku said, repeating his promise. Poor Momo. I'll let her down easy for you. Tanya joked and sent another text. It buzzed immediately. No competition at all, right? Izuku hugged her with one arm. None. They sat in silence for the rest of the trip and just enjoyed being there with each other. Chapter 28. Mr. Brave looked at the two new interns in front of his desk and he was surprised. He had thought he had a good idea about their physical sizes from the televised sports festival and he was way off. Way off. The green-haired young man was getting close to 6 feet tall, if not at or above it, and the young woman was 5 feet and 8 inches tall herself. They're supposed to just be first-year high school kids. Mr. Brave thought and took in their uniforms. The young woman was smartly dressed in a greenish-colored military-like uniform that was a different style than any he had seen before. He also didn't recognize any of the awards above her left breast or the symbol on her hat. Even the silver wings he assumed were for a flight award, wasn't something their own military gave out, which seemed to make her uniform more into a costume. The young man's costume was in a mostly different vein. He wore a form-fitting spandex outfit made of a Kevlar weave that showed off his muscular legs and arms. It had a foot-wide thick strip of dark green down the front that went from his neck to his feet with a thin white strip on either side. The rest of the spandex was a light green to show off his muscle definition. He also wore knee-high dark green boots with thick soles and dark green gloves that went up to his elbows. On his face he wore a dark green visor that went from ear to ear and across his eyes to protect them. That was the extent of the differences. He also wore the same double-breasted jacket with only a couple of awards above his left breast and he wore the same hat. Both were in the same color scheme as his spandex, making it so you didn't really notice it until you looked closely. Should I say at ease? Mr. Brave asked with a smile. Tanya chuckled and nodded at Izuku, who grinned and they changed to parade rest. They had bet if he would say anything when they stood at attention. Izuku now owed her a chocolate milkshake. You're busting my balls, aren't you? Mr. Brave asked. Just the first time, sir. Tanya said with a smile. We're here to work and wanted to show you that we can follow orders, even the simple ones like relax and don't shoot the civilians. Izuku laughed and then coughed to cover it up. He didn't succeed. Mr. Brave laughed as well and shook his head. I'll need to change the rotation again. I don't know if I can let you have access to some of the people that work for me. No sense of humor, sir? Tanya asked. Completely and deadly serious in one case, anger at making jokes with two others. Mr. Brave said. Were they like that before or after working for your agency? Izuku asked, genuinely curious. Why do you ask? It could be the result of the high crime area nearby and dealing with criminals constantly, while not being able to turn them in because they didn't catch them doing a blatant crime. Izuku explained. Mr. Brave was surprised by his observations. How did you guess that? It's just a reasonable assumption. Izuku said and nodded at Tanya. Do you want to take this one? Tanya nodded. There's a reason that the military rotates people back from service near hostile areas. It's to give them breathing room and a break from the constant pressure of having to be ready to fight. Mr. Brave sat there, stunned. He couldn't believe what he just heard. I can't just fire people because they are weary of their job. Tanya laughed. Fire them? What for? But, you just said. You actually need to hire more people and rotate them in and out. Having all 10 of your employees and their interns on patrol constantly every day, is wearing them down mentally. They need breaks to unwind and relax. Tanya said. Do you have a media room? A game room? A workout room? Mr. Brave sighed. You haven't been here 10 minutes and you're already changing my view of this place. She's not done. Izuku said with a grin. Your people are sloppy and they make mistakes. Stupid mistakes. Tanya said. Who sees the patrol schedule? Who else knows the areas you go through? Who knows how many heroes you have on each patrol in each area? Do they stop and eat while on patrol? Who's watching their backs when they do that? She asked and waved at the office. You're spending too much time behind a desk running the place and you're missing a lot of the things going on around you. Izuku turned his head to smile at the assistant that stood in the open doorway with a shocked look on her face. Now she's done. He said and looked forward. Mr. Brave was just as shocked and stared at the two interns, very opinionated interns, that he now had to deal with. Gretchen, if you could. Right away. His assistant said. Colonel, Captain, this way please. I'll show you to your rooms. Tanya and Izuku saluted their new boss and followed the assistant out of the office. They picked up their bags by her desk and went with the woman to their rooms. Mr. Brave sighed and put his hands to his brow as he leaned over his desk to rest his elbows on it. Screw it. I'm not changing the patrol schedule again. Let them deal with it on their own. Asterisk. These rooms are actually really nice. Tanya said after the assistant left. You didn't tell them that we only needed one. Izuku said. That's because they won't approve of us bunking together, even if we don't do anything except sleep. Izuku chuckled. I think it's the potential of what could happen that they would be trying to stop. If we wanted to, I think we could find a lot of places that could be used instead of a bed. Tanya laughed and walked over to the window to look outside. We'll need those schedules and when we're apart. You think he split us up? Izuku asked as he came over to the window as well. I know he did. Tanya said. With only 10 heroes in this area, he would want us spread out as much as possible. She said and pointed. There's a Yakuza right there on the street. Izuku looked and his visor zoomed in for him. He has 2 swords in his jacket and a knife in his boot. What an idiot. Tanya said. Concealed carry of a deadly weapon is a crime. He's literally walking around a hero agency with arrest me written on his forehead. I don't think his tattoo actually says that. Izuku joked and she laughed. It should. Tanya said. I'm going to assume the heroes here are going to leave us alone for the day to let us settle in. Izuku nodded. They are wasting us already. It's all right. We can wait until the morning to get our permission slips to openly use our quirks. Tanya said and turned around to look up at his face. We'll do the hero patrols and make ourselves known to the locals. She said and then let her manic grin out. Tomorrow night we can finally get to the real work that needs to be done around here. Izuku nodded in agreement and they went to their bags to put their personal items and clothing into their respective rooms. Asterisk. How are they fitting in? Mr. Brave asked his assistant that evening as they sat in the common living room. They haven't left their rooms since they arrived. Gretchen said. Excuse me. I assume it's because you haven't given them permission to leave them. Gretchen said with a shrug. Why are you only telling me this now? Mr. Brave asked and stood up. I thought you knew. You ordered them to go to their rooms. I didn't say to. Mr. Brave stopped talking and sighed. My words could be interpreted that way. Never mind. I'll go tell them now. The colonel is assigned to Mr. Flagrant and the captain is with Wiglemon for tomorrow's shift. Gretchen said. Why did we give them those 2 for the first day? Mr. Brave asked. They were the first on the rotation that don't already have their own interns. Gretchen said. Right. I'll let them know. Mr. Brave said and left the common living room and went up the stairs to the rooms. He reached the colonel's room and prepared to knock, only he didn't hear anything inside. He thought that was odd, because Gretchen said that they hadn't left their rooms. He moved over to the captain's room and heard sounds inside. He knocked and waited. The door opened and a tall and very muscular young man stood there wearing a tank top. I assume you're here to finally give us permission to leave our rooms, even though you wasted our skills and abilities for the entire day. Izuku asked. Yes. Mr. Brave said. Thanks. See you in the morning. Izuku said and shut the door. A second later, it opened again. What time does the first shift start? 9. Mr. Brave said and then told him who he and Tanya would be working with. I don't recognize the names. What are their quirks? Izuku asked. You can find out tomorrow. Mr. Brave said. He didn't want to stand there and discuss quirks for however long it would take to satisfy the young man's curiosity. What time do you show up at your office? Tanya asked from somewhere inside the room. Mr. Brave couldn't see her. 8:30. We'll be there to get our permission slips. Tanya said. Izuku. Yeah, another completely wasted morning when we could be working. Izuku said and shut the door. Tanya chuckled at Izuku. I meant you should say good night. I wasn't going to lie to him. Izuku said and then they both laughed. Mr. Brave stood outside the door and was sure that he had made a mistake inviting them to his agency. He tried to listen to what was going on inside the room for several minutes, then he gave up and went to his own room. He needed a good sleep after the things he had heard today. Asterisk. Tanya and Izuku were dressed in their hero costumes and waited outside Mr. Brave's office. At exactly 8:30, he appeared and unlocked the door. He didn't ask them what they had been doing until then, because he really didn't want to know. His hero name was Mr. Brave and he was debating if he was brave enough to tell them that he had changed his mind and didn't want them there. Mr. Brave went to his desk and opened a drawer, pulled out 2 pieces of ID, and handed them over. Meet your assigned hero in the lobby at 9 sharp. We'll be done of the first sweep by then. Tanya said and lifted from the ground in a swirl of air. Let's go, Izuku. Izuku had green lightning bolts flow over him for a moment, scooped Tanya up into his arms, and disappeared from Mr. Brave's sight. What the hell was that? A man's voice shouted from the lobby. Mr. Brave walked over to the stairs and looked down to see Mr. Flagrant standing at the bottom of the stairs with a shocked face. What happened? I was there, Mr. Flagrant pointed at the front door. And now I'm here. Mr. Brave sighed and didn't bother telling the man that he would be working with the new intern. He just pointed to Gretchen and walked back to his office. He shut his door and sat down behind his desk. He sat there and just stared at the desk. He didn't move or tried to do any work, because he was sure that he was perpetuating the stress on the people working for him. Colonel Degraff's words kept coming back to his mind and he started to slowly nod his head. He would need to make some long-lasting changes to ensure the health of the heroes of his agency and to keep his agency viable for the foreseeable future. Asterisk. I can't believe this is working. Tanya said and shook her head as they continued their sweep of the patrol area. How stupid are these guys? Extremely. Izuku said. They had only dropped hints that a rival gang was making a move into the Yakuza's territory and then pointed the gangs at the Yakuza to prove that they were encroaching on another gang's territory. They were all gathering together and were going to have a major rumble right in the middle of the main district. We need to be back at the agency in 5 minutes. Izuku said. Can we get back here before the fighting is over? We can only hope. Tanya said with a grin. Let's go. Izuku picked her up again and ran with her back to the agency. He stopped when they were in the common living room and saw the heroes and other interns were there. There you are. A stern man spat at them. By the looks of your costume, you're Wig Lemon. Izuku said and put Tanya down. The shift doesn't start for another 4 minutes. You should have been here for the mission briefing and introductions. He spat. We weren't told about that, even though we've been here since yesterday afternoon. Tanya looked at Gretchen and then at Mr. Brave. Someone has been spending too much time behind a desk and is losing touch with what heroes have to deal with. Some of the other heroes nodded their heads. Mr. Brave sighed. She's Colonel Degraff and he's Captain Midoriya. You have the Central District Patrol today. He said and walked over to the stairs. Boss? Where are you going? Gretchen asked. I'm going out to randomly walk all over. I'll be back for lunch. Mr. Brave said and went down the stairs. You're with me. Mr. Flagrant said to Tanya. Tanya nodded and followed him down the stairs. I guess I'm stuck with you. Wig Lemon snarled. No, I'm stuck with you, you ignorant ignoramus. Izuku said. What did you say to me? Wig Lemon asked and his body started to distort. Izuku darted his hand out and slapped the man's face with the back of his hand. Get a hold of yourself. You're a hero, not a villain. Stop acting like one. Everyone was shocked at what just happened. Gretchen actually shivered a little, because she knew what kind of temper Wig Lemon had. You struck me. Wig Lemon said and touched his face. Izuku swung his head the other way and slapped him properly. Every single time you act like a villain, I'm going to keep doing that. He said and stepped close to the man. Before you think you'll get the drop on me at some point, be warned. I can crush your head with just my hands. No one moved. Some didn't even breathe. Would you like proof? Izuku asked and disappeared. A moment later, he reappeared with a chunk of concrete in his hands that was the exact size of Wiggleman's head. In fact, it looked a lot like him. Here's your head. Here's what happens when heroes become villains. Izuku said and then slapped his hands together as if there hadn't been anything between them. The concrete head blew apart and covered Wig Lemon in dust. For some reason, Izuku didn't have any on him. Any questions? Izuku asked and Wig Lemon didn't say anything. No? Then get cleaned up and we can get moving. I'm going to be annoyed that you move so slow, but there's nothing I can do about that. Wig Lemon looked down at himself and then at Izuku. He was shocked that he had just seen a copy of his own face disappear into dust. You're going to be late for your shift. Izuku said, a bit loudly. That startled everyone into moving and the other heroes and interns scrambled down the stairs to get out of there quickly. Gretchen didn't move and just stood there as she stared at the handsome young man that had scared her. She was grateful that she had already gone to the bathroom or there would have been a yellow puddle on the floor. Izuku stood there and waited for Wig Lemon to come back. If he was lucky, he could guide the traumatized man to the gang fight and let him get some of that frustration worked out. He smiled at using Tanya's old army motivation tactic against someone on his own. It was oddly satisfying and he would enjoy telling Tanya later about how effective it had been. Chapter 29. Tanya thought they were wasting way too much time by strolling down the wrong street. This is not our assigned route. Mr. Flagrant gave her a stern look, then he flared his arms out wide and laughed. We're supposed to show off to the masses. Show them what real heroes are like. Irritating assholes wasting their time instead of dealing with the blatant crimes around them. Tanya asked and heard several laughs from the civilians nearby. Mr. Flagrant frowned. Young lady, there's no need for such language. Keep angering me and you're going to hear a lot more of such language. Tanya said. We're getting farther away from the central district, which is where we're supposed to be. You are under my care and you will take my advice. Zulu. Case Zulu. Izuku's voice said in her ear and out of Mr. Flagrant's belt buckle. Central district is under heavy gang war and blatant quirk usage. Everyone get your asses here now. Tanya's manic grin almost split her face as she turned to see a frightened Mr. Flagrant. I see. So you intentionally avoided the most danger. I'll let Mr. Brave know. She said and lifted up into the air. The people around them saw her and gasped and pointed. See you back at the agency. Tanya said and took off like a shot high into the air, changed direction, and disappeared. The sonic boom and shockwave shook several windows, startling everyone. Even Mr. Flagrant couldn't help but stare at the place where the young woman had disappeared from sight. I guess Mr. Flagrant is a loss. Izuku asked as Tanya appeared in the sky above him. Completely. Tanya said and drew out 2 pistols. I'll clear a path on the right. Thanks. Izuku said and picked up Wig Lemon without asking, then threw him right into the middle of the fight. His powers activated almost immediately and his body distorted and shook. The 3 gang members and 1 Yakuza had no clue what was happening to them until his body latched onto them and shook them, too. They started to distort like the hero, and anyone that tried to pull them away were caught as well. Tanya unloaded doorbuster shots and hit a dozen gang members and 8 Yakuza before she had a wide enough area for Izuku to get through. Izuku took advantage of this and ran at his best speed to get to the higher-up gang members that were using their quirks to cause a lot more damage than the normal gang members were. The other heroes weren't stupid and also took advantage of the opening to get to the main part of the fight. They tackled and subdued anyone that they could get close to, then quickly moved on. Tanya shot them and knocked them out, just in case, and she also chose to start taking out the other normal members. She didn't want to take any of the spotlight from Izuku as he tore through the leaders and lieutenants of each gang and Yakuza members. The heroes had happy faces as they pounded on the criminals that they had finally caught committing crimes and let themselves enjoy actually doing their jobs. It definitely showed in how quickly things were handled. It was a complete massacre for the gangs. Mr. Brave finally showed up and his eyes looked at the scene that was playing out in front of him. Tanya had just landed and kissed Izuku, then they started helping to tie up and secure the criminals. The heroes that worked for his agency were all talking animatedly and their interns had huge smiles on their faces as they helped Izuku and Tanya to secure everyone. When they were done, almost 100 gang and Yakuza members were taken into custody and the central district was packed almost solid with police cars and transport vehicles. No one noticed as the criminals were being loaded into the various transports that several of the gang members went missing. There were just too many for the cops to keep track of them all before they were recorded and logged into the transports. This was a productive first day. One of the female interns exclaimed. I've never felt so pumped up. It's not going to be like this every day. Tanya warned her. I think this was just all the tension building up and finally letting go. Izuku nodded and didn't mention that it was them that did that. Where's Mr. Flagrant? Mr. Brave asked as he came over to them. He was intentionally leading me away from the central district when Izuku's call came in. Tanya said, and a few of the heroes sucked in sharp breaths. I told him I would let you know that he didn't let us patrol our assigned route. Mr. Brave sighed. I assume you have GPS on your phone. Tanya nodded. I'll send you the data. She said and took out her phone and sent it with a single button click. You were already going to send that to me, weren't you? Mr. Brave asked. Of course. I would normally wait until after the shift, though. That's when we have to write our reports. Tanya said. Unless you don't want confirmation that we actually patrolled our routes. Mr. Brave didn't say anything and thought about it, which was wise. He knew if he responded in the negative, the other heroes and interns would take his words to heart and he would lose the bare reports he normally gets. If he responded positively, he was going to be deluged with extensive reports and lots of GPS data that he didn't really need. Whatever you feel is appropriate to provide is fine with me. Mr. Brave said. The written summary is necessary and your word that you actually did the route is good enough. The GPS data is just confirmation for you and your assigned hero's schedule. Tanya smiled at that answer and gave Izuku a nod. We'll add it today, just in case. Izuku said and sent his. I doubt the rest of our patrol is going to be this exciting, so sending it now won't make any difference to the report tonight. That made the other interns laugh softly. They sent theirs and added their own thoughts about response times to Izuku's warning and getting to his location quickly. I think that should be a standing order. Tanya said and everyone looked at her. Anyone calling for help, we can track where everyone else is and then how long it takes to cross parts of the city to get to them. It will help us find better routes and improve reaction times to make everyone much better responders. You're right, that is a good idea. The second female intern said. I'm adding a note to my report file. Me, too. One of the guys said. Anything that can make us better heroes is great in my book. Izuku reached out and pat the guy's shoulder. You just helped clean the streets of about 100 gang and Yakuza members, so you should be proud of yourself. He looked at the other interns and then at the heroes, especially Wig Lemon. You should all be proud of what you did today. You threw me at them. Wig Lemon said. His voice didn't hold any anger, though. Of course I did. You caught 4 of them right away with your powers and then 5 more when they tried to stop you. Izuku chuckled. You caught more of them than any of us. About 10% of them, actually. Tanya offered without admitting her own contribution. Wig Lemon couldn't stop the smile on his face as the other heroes pat his back and congratulated him for doing such a good job. The police finished loading the criminals and thanked the heroes for handling the incident so quickly and keeping the damage to a minimum. Mr. Brave looked at Tanya and saw her satisfied smile. He had seen the pellets by the downed gang members at the outskirts of the fight. She had kept it contained and didn't claim the credit. He wasn't sure why, though. Let's get back on patrol. One of the other heroes said and the others nodded. Izuku held a hand out to Wig Lemon and he took it, shook briefly, then they walked away. The only one that didn't move was Tanya. You're with me. Mr. Brave said and they walked over to where Tanya's route was supposed to be. They stayed silent for the next hour, unless talking to the people. They answered questions, let them take pictures, and waved and smiled. Mr. Brave wasn't obnoxious about it, so it was a much better experience for Tanya. She hadn't had good experiences with the press before. Maintaining an image is important for every hero's career. Some even depend on it. Mr. Brave said as they walked by a huge billboard with a life-sized empty lady sprawled across it and holding a soda bottle. I see. Tanya said and tried not to laugh at the perfect timing. I've never used your delivery service. Mr. Brave admitted. Have you ever delivered packages for free? Yes. I'm not perfect. Some address are obscured by other buildings, some have convoluted numbering, and some clients intentionally give me difficult to deliver packages to get it there for free. Tanya said and then smiled. What is it? Mr. Brave asked. I do deliver those packages for the clients that make it difficult for me, once. Mr. Brave understood what she meant. You blacklisted them? Tanya nodded. No shipping company will touch them now because they are too difficult to deal with. Mr. Brave took a breath and let it out. You ruined them. No, I just refused to let someone manipulate me and get away with it. Tanya said. If they would take advantage of me on purpose, knowing that I need that delivery money to attend UA. What will they do to the people that don't depend on it? Mr. Brave asked, rhetorically. Tanya nodded again. Once word spread to the other shipping agencies about what they did, it was out of my hands. You aren't saddened by that at all? Mr. Brave said. No, why should I be? It's not my fault they are the way they are. Tanya said. It's their own choices and decisions that caused it, not me. You brought it to light. Yes, and you already know my stance on that. Any fault is theirs and they have to suffer the consequences, not me. Tanya said and came to a stop. I saw him yesterday outside the hero agency. He's carrying 2 concealed swords and a knife on his hip. Mr. Brave sighed. We can't stop him and search like we're police officers. The knife is right there. We can all see it. Tanya said. I'm not even mentioning the Yakuza tattoos that give probable cause. It's still the same answer. Mr. Brave said. Can I just walk over there and annoy him? Tanya asked. If he attacks me, we can take him in, too. You can't provoke an attack of opportunity. I was just going to stop him from walking. Tanya said. Mr. Brave shook his head. You can't unlawfully detain him, even if you suspect he's going to commit a crime. He's already committing several crimes. I'm just trying to figure out what you think is a suitable one for arresting him and won't get me into trouble. Mr. Brave sighed again and pointed down the street. Keep walking, please. Tanya gave the Yakuza member a glance, saw his smug smile, and did as her hero mentor ordered. The rest of the hero shift passed by quickly, even after stopping for lunch for an hour, and they went back to the hero agency. Everyone was there and they all sat down to fill out their reports, added in the details they thought necessary, and then enjoyed eating supper together. Everyone's moods were high, thanks to the huge gang bust that morning, and the conversation was fast and light-hearted. When the meal was over, Izuku and Tanya went to their rooms, or one room really, and locked the door. How long should we wait to go out? Izuku whispered as he sat on the bed. Tanya sat on his lap to let him hug her. At least 3 hours. We should set our alarms for 2 in the morning and go full stealth. Izuku nodded and one of his hands lightly rubbed her thigh. I got 4 of them and one of them is the one you picked out. Tanya let a grin out. If we see that other Yakuza that keeps taunting the heroes here, we take him, too. Izuku's grin matched hers. I read your report. Mr. Brave's hero name is a complete fabrication. He should be Mr. Administrator or Hair Blade Guy. Tanya chuckled. It's a useful power, if the villains don't wear anything that could block blades. He can always go for the face and eyes. Izuku said. Nope. He's too squeamish for that. Also, a lot of villains and heroes wear face coverings. Tanya said and reached up to tap his visor. What made you think to attach it to the cap instead of wearing them like glasses? Practicality. Izuku said. How so? The nearly invisible strap keeps the hat on my head. Izuku said. I didn't have that while wearing just the visor. Tanya slipped her hat off and then pulled his off. Izuku, are you prepared for tonight? She asked, her hand lightly touching his cheek. If what you said is true, and I have never doubted your word, then this is the start of your revenge. Izuku said. I don't think he will say anything or give up any information, though. Tanya nodded. This is to make a point. A very pointed point. Izuku nodded as well. We are partners in all things. Tanya felt a fluttering in her heart and she didn't question it this time. She let it fill her as her ice blue eyes flickered to gold several times. She leaned forward and kissed Izuku passionately as she wrapped her arms around his neck. Izuku kissed her back enthusiastically and they stayed like that for several minutes. When the kiss eventually ended, Tanya was breathing a little heavily and she felt a very prominent bulge pressed to the side of her thigh. And not yet. Tanya whispered as her eyes flickered back and forth, then they settled on ice blue. It's all right. Izuku said and hugged her. I think there's a brick wall in the bathroom I can use. Tanya chuckled and then laughed. Izuku gave her a kiss on the cheek and they sat there for quite some time. They didn't even bother trying to go to sleep and waited for the right time. When it arrived, the two of them changed into their stealth outfits, applied new contacts to protect their eyes, and loaded up on the equipment they would need. Izuku put a very heavy desk in front of the room's door before he and Tanya jumped out the window. They had a mission to start and gang members to interrogate. Chapter 30. Tanya and Izuku worked on the 2 normal gang members for an hour and were a little disappointed by the results. They worked over the Yakuza member and were not happy with what they found out. The implications alone were too much to discuss right away. They dispatched those 3 and went into the last room of the abandoned building to confront the final captive. He was the one that Tanya had singled out. The young man beamed a smile at Tanya as she entered the room. Praise the Lord. His chosen has come. Tanya let her eyes go gold and saw the young man still had that same golden aura that indicated being X's blessing. You can keep that garbage to yourself. She said in an even tone. I need to ask you some questions. He loves you and all you need to do is submit to his grace. The young man interrupted. What was your assigned task? Izuku asked and the guy didn't react. What was your assigned task? Tanya asked and the young man smiled. To watch you and assess you for compatibility. The young man said. His grace approves of. Tanya made a swipe motion with her hand and Izuku instantly took out a knife and sliced the young man's throat. The young Yakuza member started to gurgle and choke as his blood flowed out the wound, and then time seemed to come to a stop. The young man sat up straighter and the wound didn't heal. Your defiance is laughable, as is your attempt to stop me. Being X's voice said. This vessel is nothing when compared to the number of followers that are flocking to me. You see, that's where you're wrong. Tanya said and let a manic grin cross her face. That nothing vessel has provided me the exact purpose that I required of it. The head tilted as if in confusion. It brought you out of wherever you're hiding and you manifested here. Tanya said and pulled out a very special knife that she had painstakingly crafted in secret for years. It wasn't until they had raided that spy business that she had found the final piece of equipment that she needed to complete it. I am God. I am everywhere. The tilted head said. You know this. If that were true, then you never would have manifested here. Tanya said and made the knife glow. It extended out to become the bayonet magical blade that used to be on the front of her rifle in the other world. Because you would already know what I plan to do with your nothing vessel. What are you doing? Being X asked. Just sending a message. Tanya said and shoved the blade into the young man's chest with her magic that was filled with righteous fury. She pierced the pure heart of the nothing vessel and both Being X and the young man let out howls of anguish before Being X's influence waned and time resumed at the normal pace. Izuku was surprised that worked. The connection he forms really works both ways. Tanya nodded. She had suspected it back in her old world and never had the opportunity to test it. Being X apparently needs vessels here to continue his influence. She said and examined the dead vessel that used to be a Yakuza. It's the same as back then. Once he uses them up, there's nothing left inside. Izuku sighed. I had hoped to save some of them. Tanya sighed as well. I'm sorry, Izuku. Even if I tried to heal them, their life essences are already used up and it's just an empty husk. Izuku walked over to her and sheathed his knife. He took her into his arms and looked into her eyes. You warned me that there was a very slim chance that they could recover when that entity was excised. I never imagined that the longer they are under his influence, the lower the odds became. I don't know if we can catch him enough times before he builds enough of a bridge to completely mess with everything here. Tanya said with a sigh. Don't talk like that. We've got this. Izuku said and kissed her cheek. We now know where the gang base is, the local Yakuza's main base, and one of their branches are located. Tanya took a deep breath and let it out, then she smiled. Let's go. We're wasting night light. Izuku nodded and they gathered up their interrogation tools and equipment, then put the 4 bodies into a pile, and lit them on fire. Thanks to the spy hideout they had raided, they gained a nice source of incendiary grenades. Tanya charged one with her quirk, hit the timer, and they used their stealth techniques to run away. They were a block away when it ignited. Waboom. They turned to look and saw the huge explosion. They also saw the building disintegrate and the fireball catch the surrounding buildings on fire. Thankfully, they were abandoned as well. We gotta go. Izuku said and grabbed her in a princess carry, covered them both in green lightning, and took off at his best speed. Tanya cast Mage Shield around herself, just so she wouldn't suffer the buffeting winds, and they were back at the hero agency in 3 seconds. She flew them up to the window of their room and they entered without a sound. They quickly stripped off to their underwear, tucked their stealth outfits under the bed, and laid down on the covers together. Just then, an alarm went off that they hadn't heard before. Weep, weep, weep. Up. Youjo up. A man's voice yelled and a fist started banging on doors. There's a massive fire in the eastern district. Izuku went to the door of the room and removed the heavy desk before he opened it. Full costume. Kid, if you think you can fight a raging fire naked, go for it. A man he didn't recognize said and he moved down the hallway to bang on the other doors. Izuku closed the door and looked at Tanya. I fight a raging hard on all the time. Who needs clothes? Tanya snorted and laughed as they grabbed their real costumes, dressed quickly, and left their room to join the others in the main living area. All right, people. Mr. Brave said. Anyone with a water-based quirk is lead on this. What if we can carry water quickly? Izuku asked. Here's a bucket. One of the interns said and she handed a large one over. Where did you get this? Izuku asked as he looked at the industrial-sized metal bucket. Yeah girl, hand them all out if you got more. One of the other male interns said. The young woman blushed. I'm sorry. I only have one. Izuku looked at it and it looked expensive. Can you tell me where you got it? The young woman nodded. It's my quirk. It's called storage. Oh, sweet mercy. You're going to be a great hero. The other female intern exclaimed. The young woman shook her head. No, you're jumping to conclusions like everyone else I tell. Tanya looked at her and at Izuku, then he nodded. She smiled. You can only carry one item of that kind at a time. The young woman gasped. How did you guess that? You only have one bucket and not a stack of buckets. Izuku said. It's also not a normal bucket, either. It's a big expensive one. I bought it myself, just in case. The young woman said as her blush returned. What else are you carrying? Tanya asked. Let me see. The young woman's face blanked out for a second. One set of normal clothes, except socks. I only have one of them. One shoe, one boot, one large Bowie knife, one microwave dinner, one bottle of soda, my empty school backpack, one book to read, one pencil, one notepad. That's enough. We have a fire to get to, people. Mr. Brave said. We spread out to make a perimeter, and if you meet anyone suspicious, be cautious. We don't know who could be stupid enough to light empty buildings on fire. If there are any gang members or yakuza in the area, stay clear of them. Even if they are guilty, they won't hesitate to kill you and let you ask them questions later. Note who they are and keep the fire contained. Tanya and Izuku gave each other a knowing glance. Let's go. Mr. Brave said, and they all jogged out of there and down the stairs to leave the agency completely unprotected. Gretchen was not going to stop anyone from attacking, not by herself. Tanya and Izuku shared another look, and Tanya hopped up into the air. I'm going to try to blow the flames back. Tanya said. Make sure you aim towards the center of it, in case it overshoots and increases the flames. Mr. Brave said. Tanya took off flying and the heroes ran towards the eastern district. Izuku didn't bother going fast, because he knew the bodies needed a bit more time to be burned up. Spread out. Mr. Brave ordered, and everyone did so. Izuku looked around and found a fire hydrant. He ran over to it, popped open the cap on the side and turned the knob on the top to start the water flow. Nice going, kid. The hero that woke them up said, and he ran into someone's yard and came back with a normal bucket. They both filled them and ran to the closest fire, just as a sonic boom sounded off to their left and a good 50 feet of flames snuffed out, and then surged right back into the now fresh oxygen. Damn it! Tanya shouted and disappeared, then reappeared with a dumpster. Izuku. Great idea. Izuku said and handed the filled bucket to her as she dropped the dumpster beside him. Tanya started flying strafing runs with the big bucket and Izuku filled the dumpster. When it was close to full, he tossed it up into the air as Tanya flew back and dropped the big bucket into his waiting hands. Thanks. Tanya said and did another strafing run while pouring out the dumpster on the nearby fire. She wasn't trying to put it out, only contain it to stop it spreading. They could worry about putting it out when the fire trucks came. The heroes and interns worked for nearly 20 minutes before a very old fire truck finally showed up. It was understaffed and half of the hoses were cracked and unusable. Jesus, why the hell did you show up? Wiglemon asked one of the firemen. It's our job. He said, and they hooked up a hose to the truck and went over to the fire hydrant. Another fireman used a wrench to turn it off. Hey, we need that water. Storage girl said. We need to hook up the hose without the pressure on it. One of the firemen said, and the heroes nearby could only stand around and wait. When the hose was attached, the fireman turned the fire hydrant back on and it went through the hose quickly, and right into the fire truck. You have got to be kidding me. Izuku exclaimed. You're riding empty? In the most fire-prone area of the city. It costs more gas to drive around with the truck filled with water all the time. One of the firemen said, and they stood there to wait for the truck to fill. They started to unroll 2 hoses on the other side of the fire truck and hook them up to the pumps there. How long? Wiglemon spat. 20 minutes. The fireman closest to them said. Half of the district will be on fire by then. Someone else shouted as Tanya came back with the dumpster and landed. What's going on? Tanya asked, and her eyes immediately took in the scene. I really hate administrative red tape. What do you mean? Storage girl asked. We're heroes and are legally required to defer to civilian services when they are on the scene. Izuku said and crossed his arms. We can't interfere with their jobs or offer to help it go faster. All of the firemen winced at his yell. Izuku turned to the girl that gave him the large industrial bucket. Storage girl, thank you for letting me borrow this great bucket. The young woman blushed. You're welcome. She said and then whispered something. What was that? Izuku asked. My name. It's Single Item Girl. Oh. Sorry about that, Single Item Girl. Izuku pointed to the bucket. You can put it away, now that we can't use it. Okay. She said and touched it to store it. Izuku beamed a smile at her and she blushed furiously. Geez, stop with the charm already. Tanya said with a chuckle. Do you want to find a shovel or something? Maybe we can dig up some dirt from an empty lot to make a fire break. I have a shovel. Single Item Girl said and took it out. The curved steel gleamed in the fire's reflected light. It looked expensive, too. Izuku reached out to put his gloved hand on hers. Thank you for the offer and I appreciate it. However, I won't take the chance that I might break it. She opened her mouth to tell him to take it anyway, then nodded and stored it again. Tanya and I will come to your room tomorrow to discuss some things. Izuku said without letting her hand go. Oh okay. Single Item Girl stammered. To talk. Just talk. Tanya said with as much of a sincere tone as she could. The young woman nodded. Let's go look for some dirt. Izuku said and picked up the dumpster. Tanya nodded and the two of them started to walk away, then they both stopped and turned back. Single Item Girl? Let's go. Me? She asked and pointed to herself. You're going to help us a lot, so yes. Tanya said and waved for her to follow. Okay. Single Item Girl yelled and ran to catch up to them. What do you think that was about? One of the male interns asked the others. I have no idea. I thought they were a couple. The other female intern asked. Which ones? One of the guys asked and they all laughed a little. The colonel and the captain. She said. They even won the sports festival together and that never happened before. That's because they kicked ass. Wiglemon said. I've never seen anything like it. Is that why you gave them a hard time when they came here? Mr. Brave asked. I thought they were going to be arrogant and full of themselves. Wiglemon said. I'm glad I was wrong. Were you? Mr. Brave asked himself. He remembered Tanya's and Izuku's behavior when they reported in that first afternoon and their reaction that night when he realized they thought they weren't allowed to leave their rooms. He also read the reports about Izuku handling Wiglemon after he had left. The fire truck let out a whirring sound and the pumps kicked in to build pressure. Okay, heroes. You're up. One of the firemen said and pointed to the hoses. We need hands to hold the hoses steady. We're on it. Mr. Brave said and he and the several heroes and interns there split up. They helped the understaffed firemen control the hoses and they started to fight the raging fire that had spread significantly as they all stood around to wait. Mr. Brave looked around and didn't see Izuku or Tanya. He just knew that they were messing things up even more around the area. I definitely regret asking them to intern here.